Chapter 1508. In the end, Lu Yi didn't do so because he was afraid that the reincarnation tree was too far away from the 9 provinces. Even if he knew the way home, it wouldn't be worth it if he had to fly for hundreds or thousands of years. The mark of the reincarnation tree could only be used once. It would dissipate after a single use. It could be regarded as a last resort to save his life. So Lu Yi naturally cherished it. But unexpectedly, the mark reacted on its own at this time. Lu Yi didn't activate it, so there was only one possibility for it to do so. The original owner of the mark had activated it. It was obvious that the reincarnation tree wanted him to go over. Although he didn't know what would happen, this was a good opportunity to ask the reincarnation tree about the way home. Moreover, the reincarnation tree had activated the mark on its own. It shouldn't be a problem to find it and give it another one later. Just as all kinds of thoughts flashed through Lu Ye's mind, the green leaf mark on the back of his hand seemed to come alive and flew out. A green light illuminated the entire cave, covering it in a layer of green. The Spiritas woman, who had been sitting quietly not far from Lu Yi, was startled. She looked up and saw the strange green leaf. She couldn't help but be startled. Then, as if she thought of something, her eyes suddenly widened as she stared at the green leaf in disbelief. Because if she was right, then the meaning of this green leaf was intriguing. Lu Yi was looking at the Spiritas woman at this moment. He didn't have any objections to the reincarnation tree summoning him. He had something to ask. But if he left, what would happen to the Spiritas woman? Lu Yi didn't feel at ease staying here. If the Spiritas woman took the opportunity to run away, it would be useless even if he had the restriction token. He didn't know if he could bring her along. If he could, it would save him a lot of trouble. The green light became brighter and brighter. The green leaf suddenly disintegrated, turning into a ball of green light. Then, the green light twisted and quickly evolved into the shape of a big tree. The branches of the big tree hung down, intertwining into the shape of an oval door. The aura of a door came from inside the door. This was a door. When Lu Yi saw this, he knew he could take the Spiritas woman with him. He quickly sent a message to Chu Shun, informing him that he had something to do, and that he would be returning at an uncertain time. Then he got up and called out to the Spiritas woman, "Let's go!" The Soul Clan woman had always been cold and distant. Although she had not resisted Lu Yi during this period of time, she had never been kind to him. But at this moment, she obediently stood up and took the lead to step into the door that drooped down from the branches. Lu Yi followed behind her. When Lu Ye's figure disappeared, the green light in the cave suddenly disappeared, and the cave returned to darkness. In an unknown land, when Lu Yi appeared, the Spiritas woman was standing off to the side, curiously looking around. Lu Yi was also observing, and found that this place seemed to be an empty space. However, it was very bright, and it was unknown where the light came from. There was no one else here except him and the Spiritas woman. But soon, a phantom suddenly appeared in front of them. It was a big tree. The big tree looked exactly the same as the one Lu Yi had seen in his cave. The reincarnation tree's main body should also look like this. What appeared in front of Lu Yi at this moment was naturally not its main body. It was probably a special manifestation to facilitate communication between them. The branches on both sides of the big tree drooped down like 2 arms. The roots at the bottom were extremely dense. On the trunk, there were clear facial features. At first glance, it looked like an amiable old man. The fluffy crown of the tree was like its hair. The frosty Spiritas woman looked solemn and respectfully bowed. "Spiritas Li Shang greets Elder Shu." Lu Yi glanced at her. They had been together for so long, but he didn't know her name. Only now did he know that she was called Li Shang. Without thinking too much, Lu Yi also bowed. The reincarnation tree looked at Li Shang, a gentle smile on its old face. "Is Hun Ke well?" Li Shang was a little excited. "Elder Shu, thank you for your concern. The patriarch is still healthy." That's good." The reincarnation tree looked nostalgic. "When I first saw him, he was just a constellation. In the blink of an eye, 2,000 years have passed." After a slight sigh, the reincarnation tree looked at Lu Yi. "Young friend, we meet again." Lu Yi said, "Elder Shu, why did you summon me?" The reincarnation tree couldn't have brought him here for no reason. Moreover, The door that evolved from the mark was not mandatory. If he didn't want to, he could not come here. However, he did have something he needed the reincarnation tree's help with. I do need your help with something, the reincarnation tree said slowly. Young friend, you should know that many homeless tribes have been settled in my tree realm. Luyi was naturally aware of this. When he first came to the reincarnation tree, he was thrown into the fairy tree realm. The origins of these tribes were complicated, and there were many races. Basically, they had lost their homes and had nowhere to live. The reincarnation tree's realm could provide them with a relatively peaceful living environment. Of course, if there were no insectoids causing trouble, it would be even more peaceful. Back then, the insectoids found a void beast core from somewhere and used the core's power to open up connections with other tree realms. They invaded and abducted some rare tribes. Unfortunately, they were all wiped out by Luyi in the end. Even the void beast core was snatched away by Luyi. Is there a problem in the tree realm? Luyi asked subconsciously. However, a place like the tree realm was only suitable for creatures below the divine ocean realm. It was not suitable for Constellation to stay in the tree realm. He was now a constellation. Logically speaking, even if there was a problem in the tree realm, it was not his turn to solve it. It's not the tree realm. The reincarnation tree explained. Right now, there's a realm that's suffering from the flames of war. The creatures in that realm no longer have any hope of survival, so they hope to migrate to the tree realm. However, they need to defeat the invaders first. I heard their request, so I have to find a way to help. Luyi roughly understood. Elder Shu wants me to help them solve their problem, and then bring them to the tree realm? The reincarnation tree said. Exactly. Luyi was a little puzzled. Elder Shu shouldn't be able to summon just me, right? If the enemy in that realm is too strong, I alone might not be able to help. Why not summon Yu Yao or Rizhao? Although the reincarnation tree's imprint might not be bestowed even once in hundreds or thousands of years, many people had obtained it over the years. Those who could be favored by the reincarnation tree were undoubtedly extremely monstrous talents. There were many people at the level of Yu Yao and Rizhao, so Luyi could not figure out why the reincarnation tree would summon only him. The reincarnation tree said, everything has to follow the rules, especially for someone like this old man. Rules are the foundation of this old man's existence. If there were no rules, the starry sky would have long been in chaos. The strongest on the battlefield over there is only a constellation, so this old man can only summon a constellation. In the past few hundred years, the reincarnation tree had only given Luyi one imprint, so Luyi was the only constellation that met the requirements. Luyi roughly understood. If the battlefield over there was only a constellation, then he would have no problem. The reincarnation tree continued. As the starry sky supreme treasure that guards this realm, this old man must treat all living beings equally. As it said this, it winked at Luyi. Luyi immediately understood that this so-called equal treatment was also divided into good and bad. For example, the reincarnation tree would not refuse the insect race if they wanted to enter the tree realm. This was equal treatment, but it could arrange for Luyi to enter the tree realm, causing great losses and trouble to the insect race. Luyi could not help but think of the Constellation Hall. Back then, he was brought into the Constellation Hall by the Constellation Hall, but he never knew what the Constellation Hall's intentions were. After pondering for a long time, he realized that the Constellation Hall wanted him to help clean up the seaweed outside the hall. However, it did not give him any hints, only letting Luyi do it himself. Back then, Luyi felt that the Constellation Hall deserved to be established, but now, after hearing the reincarnation tree's words, he suddenly realized that the Constellation Hall, a starry sky supreme treasure, probably had the same restrictions as the reincarnation tree. That was, it had to treat all living beings equally. The seaweed was also alive, so it naturally could not give Luyi a hint to help clean it up. However, if Luyi comprehended it on his own, it had nothing to do with it. From the looks of it, these starry sky supreme treasures with their own sentience seemed to be restricted. Although they were powerful, they could not do as they pleased. This old man was originally afraid that you would not be able to do it alone, But since you have the help of the soul race, this matter is even more likely to succeed. The reincarnation tree clearly misunderstood the relationship between Lu Yi and Li Shang. Lu Yi had no intention of explaining. I need some detailed information, Lu Yi asked. Although he was not afraid of anyone in the constellation plane, this was not a one-on-one battle. This was a realm that was suffering from the flames of war. This was a war. Before he began his operation, Lu Yi naturally had to gather as much information as possible. Of course, the reincarnation tree did not refuse Lu Yi's request. If Lu Yi did not mention it, it would not be easy to explain. Since Lu Yi had mentioned it, it naturally had to tell him everything it knew. A moment later, Lu Yi's expression became strange. He did not expect things to be so coincidental. If the living beings of that realm were facing such a race, then he would have great prospects. However, it was not a coincidence. In this world, there were not many races that would maliciously invade other realms. Apart from those notorious existences in the starry sky, there were really no other races. After the reincarnation tree finished speaking, Lu Yi said, "Old tree, if this matter is not successful, then forget it. If this matter is successful, I have a small request." The reincarnation tree chuckled and said, "Whether it is successful or not, as long as you come back alive, this old man can fulfill one of your requests." Since it was so straightforward, Lu Yi naturally did not need to say anything more. Moreover, his request was not difficult. It was nothing more than asking for a way back. It would not make things difficult for the reincarnation tree. End of chapter. Chapter 1509. Moreover, Lu Yi seriously suspected that the reincarnation tree knew that he cultivated the secret arts of a certain race, because he had relied on that secret art to wipe out an entire race in the battle of the Alpha Origin Divine Sea. Otherwise, there was no reason for the reincarnation tree to place its hopes on Lu Yi, who was now just a constellation. The Alpha Origin Divine Sea was the secret domain inside the reincarnation tree, and was rumored to be the birthplace of the reincarnation tree. Given how powerful the reincarnation tree was, nothing that happened inside could escape its perception. There's no time to lose. If little friend has nothing to prepare, you can set off now. This old man will wait for your triumphant return. While speaking, 2 green leaves suddenly drifted down from the reincarnation tree. One of them flew towards the back of Lu Yi's hand and gently imprinted itself on it before quickly merging with it. Lu Yi immediately felt that the reincarnation tree mark he had previously consumed had returned. The other green leaf was the same as the one he had seen before. As it fluttered, it released a bright green light before transforming into the silhouette of the reincarnation tree. Its branches drooped down and intertwined to form a door. Lu Yi silently stepped through the door. This time, there was no need for Lu Yi to say anything as Li Shang followed closely behind. With a single step, the world changed. When Lu Yi appeared in the gloomy domain, he saw 2 tall figures standing in front of him. He looked up and sized up the 2 figures curiously. Although Lu Yi roughly knew the situation of this domain from the reincarnation tree, and knew what races lived in this domain, he had never seen them before. The figure on the left looked familiar. It was like an old tree that had turned into a spirit. It had 4 limbs and facial features. However, it was a little different from the reincarnation tree. This should be the wood spirit race. There were 5 spirit races in the starry sky, which corresponded to metal, wood, water, fire, and earth respectively. They were collectively known as the spirit races. But because of their different attributes, each spirit race branch was very different. The spirit race was also an extremely rare race. Although they were not as rare as the mermaids and spirits that Lu Yi had seen before, they were still few in number compared to the other races. However, no matter which spirit race branch it was, they all had spirit cores in their bodies, which were similar in nature to the crystal cores of star beasts. However, the spirit cores of the spirit race were much more useful than the crystal cores of star beasts. Spirit cores were extremely beneficial to cultivators' cultivation and understanding of certain secret techniques, and also attracted many people with ulterior motives. The figure standing next to the wood spirit was also tall, but unlike the wood spirit that looked like an old tree, This fellow looked more like a giant mushroom. There was a semicircular canopy on top of his head. The pitch-black color of the canopy made it look extremely sturdy. It was definitely not inferior to any defensive spiritual treasure. His body was straight and round, and he had two small bean-like eyes where his facial features should be. He looked extremely comical. Race. Although he had seen a lot in the universe see, it was only the tip of the vast starry sky. Indeed, there was nothing. He had seen everything he saw in the starry skies. He had seen everything. Lu's he. Both the wood spirit and the spore race had an aura comparable to that of a late-stage constellation realm cultivator. This region was undoubtedly a large one, and the spiritual chi of heaven and earth was quite dense. Otherwise, it would not have nurtured a constellation realm cultivator. According to the information provided by the reincarnation tree, this region was where the wood spirit race and the spore race coexisted. They had lived here peacefully for many tens of thousands of years, until this time, enemies invaded. They could not hold on any longer, so they had no choice but to send a request to the reincarnation tree. Lu Yi looked back. There was a clone of the reincarnation tree behind him. He was able to come here because of the reincarnation tree's clone. However, at this moment, the leaves on the reincarnation tree's clone had all withered and withered. It was unknown how long it would take for it to recover, or if it would never recover. When Lu Yi appeared, the wood spirit and the spore race bowed. The wood spirit said, "I am the wood spirit race leader of the Blue Jade region, Mu He. Greetings." He then pointed at the spore race. "This is the spore race leader, Black Umbrella." Black Umbrella also said, "Greetings, fellow Taoists." Lu Yi pondered for a moment. Wushuang Li Tai Bai. Li Shang, who was behind him, did not say a word. She looked like a loyal servant girl. Mu He looked past Lu Yi and looked at the reincarnation tree's clone behind him. Seeing that the reincarnation tree's clone had withered, he said in surprise, "Only the two of you came this time?" Lu Yi nodded. "Yes, only the two of us." Mu He seemed a little disappointed. He and Black Umbrella used the reincarnation tree's clone to send a request to the reincarnation tree. They thought that the reincarnation tree would send some experts, but it turned out that there were only 2 constellation mansions. Even if they were late constellation mansions, the effect they could play in such a battle was extremely limited. However, they were people sent by the reincarnation tree after all. Moreover, 2 more people were considered 2 more helpers. Mu He did not dare to be negligent and said in a booming voice, "The 2 of you have just arrived. Please settle down first before making any plans." Lu Yi raised his hand and said, "There's no need. Patriarch, please tell me the current situation in detail." Naturally, he could sense the wood spirit's intentions. However, there were some things that didn't need to be explained. Actions would always be more convincing than words. Furthermore, the reincarnation tree had specially summoned him here to help because it valued his ability to suppress the invading species. If it were any other race invading the Blue Jade world, it would be difficult for Lu Yi to do it alone. However, if it was that race, then it was hard to say. He wanted to end the battle quickly and did not have too much time to waste here. The wood spirit tree's brows furrowed slightly, but it still cooperated and explained the current situation. Although the reincarnation tree could listen to the request of the wood spirit race and the spore race through the clone left in this world, and roughly knew the situation in this world, it was not clear about the specific situation. After hearing Mu He's explanation, Lu Yi found that the situation in the Blue Jade world was much better than he had imagined. He had originally thought that after the invasion of that race, the world would be plunged into misery and desolation, but in fact, the wood spirit race and the spore race had built a strong line of defense here, resisting the final pressure of the invading enemy. This gathering place was also the last pure land of the 2 races in the Blue Jade world. If this line of defense was broken, then what awaited them would be the fate of enslavement and extermination of their race. While Mu He was explaining, Lu Yi looked up and saw the white clouds in the sky pressing down like thick cotton wool. When he first came here, he thought that it was just a simple white cloud, but after hearing Mu He's explanation, he understood that it was not a white cloud at all, but a technique used by the spore race. The thing that looked like a white cloud was actually formed by the convergence of countless tiny spores. It was these strange spores that formed a line of defense that prevented the enemy from continuing to invade. Now this gathering place was tightly surrounded by the spore cloud. If they could not break through the protection of the spore cloud, the enemy could only stare helplessly from the outside. But now that they were trapped, they would definitely lose in the long run. Therefore, after realizing that the future was bleak, Mu He and Black Umbrella asked the reincarnation tree for help. Lu Yi looked and saw that in the thick spore cloud, there were occasionally 1 or 2 blood-red flashes, but they quickly disappeared without a trace. After Mu He finished speaking, he did not say anything more. Lu Yi thought for a moment and said, "I'll go and take a look. I'll have to trouble the 2 chiefs to inform the various tribes." Mu He said, "Fellow Taoist, please be careful. Don't leave the protective range of the spore cloud." Lu Yi nodded and soared into the sky. Li Shang's figure flashed and followed, but soon disappeared without a trace. Under normal circumstances, if she disappeared like this, Lu Yi would not be able to see any trace of her unless he activated the insight spiritual inscriptions to enhance his eyes. But this time, even if she disappeared, she still took the initiative to open up a trace of her aura to Lu Yi, so that Lu Yi could clearly sense where she was. This was undoubtedly because Li Shang was afraid that he would misunderstand. After rushing into the spore cloud, Lu Yi immediately sensed the uniqueness of these spores. These spores were extremely small and almost imperceptible to the naked eye. Although they were small, they gave off a very dangerous feeling. Lu Yi immediately understood that the spore cloud formed by these tiny spores was not as simple as just protection. If an enemy dared to enter, they would definitely be possessed by these spores. As for the consequences, Lu Yi did not know. This reminded him of Wuxia. Wuxia also knew how to plant mushrooms. When those strange mushrooms were broken, countless spores would fly out. They had a strange and unpredictable power. Not long after entering the spore cloud, Lu Yi saw 2 tall figures standing side by side. Looking closer, Lu Yi realized that it was a wood spirit and a spore race member. At this moment, the spore race member pressed one hand on the wood spirit, and power surged around him. Lu Yi did not know what mysterious method he was using. The magical thing was that with the activation of the spore race's power, mushrooms of various sizes kept growing on the wood spirit's body. Then, they burst open and turned into mini spores that merged into the spore cloud, increasing its size. Lu Yi stopped beside them and watched for a while. He felt that it was quite magical. The wood spirit and spore race member were also curiously looking at Lu Yi. However, they had obviously received some information from their respective tribe leaders. They nodded at Lu Yi in a friendly manner with a grateful expression. For someone who dared to help them in this kind of situation, whether it was a human or something else, the wood spirit and spore race would not be stingy with their gratitude and respect. Lu Yi also nodded and encouraged them. Hold on a little longer. He could see that the wood spirit and spore race member had expended a lot of energy. He did not know how long they had been here. Moreover, their cultivation was not high. They were only at the true lake stage. Along the way, he kept running into groups of spore race and wood spirit. This spore cloud that covered the entire colony was undoubtedly created in this way. After so many years of coexistence, the 2 races did not distinguish between each other. This kind of cooperation was already very familiar to them. End of chapter. Chapter 15:10. The spore people and wood spirits had different cultivation levels. At first, Lu Yi only encountered Cloud River and True Lake cultivators. It wasn't until he was dozens of miles into the spore cloud that he encountered Divine Sea Realm spore people and wood spirits. This was clearly an arrangement between the 2 races. Those with higher cultivation levels were at the front, while those with lower cultivation levels were at the back. Further ahead were the Constellation Realm spore people and wood spirits. This was already the front line of the battlefield. Not only was there a spore cloud here, but there was also an enormous blood-red sea that surrounded the entire spore cloud like a sea of blood. Blood race. The race that invaded the Blue Jade world was the blood race that was as infamous as the insectoids in this part of the universe. The sea of blood was clearly not something that a single blood race could do. Just like the spore people, the blood race could also gather the strength of their own race into a tower, turning the weak into the strong. This was a situation where neither side was willing to give an inch. The boundless sea of blood surged outside the spore cloud, and spores were constantly being sucked into it. However, the tiny spores that were sucked into the sea of blood didn't just disappear. Although most of them were annihilated by the sea of blood, there were still some that were silently performing all kinds of strange functions. So when Lu Yi arrived at this position, he saw the spore cloud and the sea of blood colliding. They were like two gigantic beasts that were trying to devour each other. After observing silently for a while, Lu Yi found that the spore cloud was clearly at a disadvantage. At this rate, the protection of dozens of miles deep would be completely devoured in a month or two. While he was quietly observing, Li Shang looked at Lu Yi with a complicated expression not far away. She was discovered by a powerhouse in a certain galaxy and was accidentally captured. After that, she was sent to the Wanxiang Sea to be auctioned off and fell into Lu Ye's hands. Originally, she didn't think much of this human. As a late-stage constellation realm cultivator, she thought that she could easily escape with her own strength. After all, most cultivators didn't know much about the soul race's methods. However, after a few exchanges, she found that she was too naive. Lu Ye's divine sea had a strange existence like a warship that she couldn't fight back at all. She had no choice but to give up on her original plan. Recently, although Lu Yi did not treat her harshly, and even intended to confide in her, wanting to gain her trust, but how could Li Shang easily believe him? From the beginning to the end, Li Shang had made up her mind that no matter what Lu Yi said, she would turn a deaf ear to it. This was because a rare race like the Spiritas was simply too attractive to other races. No matter who obtained them, they would find a way to make them swear loyalty to them. She had long heard of the treachery of humans, so no matter what, she wouldn't believe a single word Lu Yi said. This was also the reason why she didn't communicate with Lu Yi at all. Humans were good at using words to move people's hearts. This was something she needed to guard against. Until he went to the merfolk's territory and saw a group of merfolk. Li Shang simply couldn't believe that the merfolk, who were as rare as the soul race, had such a good relationship with Lu Yi. Moreover, Lu Yi had never revealed the slightest covetousness towards the merfolk. She couldn't help but come to a sudden realization, and she wondered if she was gauging the heart of a gentleman with her own mean measure. Recently, she had been considering whether to talk to Lu Yi and ask him about the situation of his friends who had lost their corporeal bodies, but she hadn't made up her mind yet. Suddenly, after being summoned by the reincarnation tree and seeing the most famous starry sky supreme treasure in this side of the starry sky, Li Shang's shock was simply indescribable. She had long heard that the reincarnation tree would bestow a mark to certain cultivators, but this kind of mark might not be seen even once in hundreds or thousands of years. Only the cultivators most favored by the reincarnation tree were eligible to receive it. Some powerful experts even did some statistics and found that as long as a cultivator received a mark from the reincarnation tree, 90% of them would have a chance to advance to the sunshine realm. As for those who didn't have a chance to advance, they died halfway. Not because their aptitude wasn't good enough. Li Shang didn't expect that the human who won her at the auction had actually received a mark from the reincarnation tree. Didn't this mean that he had the qualifications to advance to the sunshine realm? Thinking of the time she spent with him and the various miracles around him, Li Shang realized that she had underestimated him. Such a person would definitely become an overlord in the future. Moreover, someone who was favored by the reincarnation tree definitely had a good temperament. Why would a starry sky supreme treasure, like the reincarnation tree, bestow a mark on someone with a bad temperament? It was only now that Li Shang's impression of Lu Yi changed. She secretly made up her mind to find an opportunity to have a good chat with him after this matter was over. Just as she was observing, Lu Yi suddenly turned toward her. "Can you sneak in without being discovered?" Li Shang didn't know what he was planning, but she still replied honestly, "Yes." The soul race's methods were incomprehensible to other races, so sneaking into the blood sea was naturally a piece of cake. Lu Yi nodded and turned to the spore race constellation beside him. who was controlling the spore cloud to contend with the Blood Sea. Fellow Taoist, can I trouble you to make a big commotion? The spore race constellation was puzzled. What do you want? Lu Yi replied calmly. I want to go in, but I don't want to be discovered. The spore race constellation frowned. That might be a little difficult. Right now, there was a blood race constellation opposite him controlling the Blood Sea to contend with him. Within the Blood Sea, the blood race's senses were extremely sharp. No foreign object would be able to escape their senses. Lu Yi was just about to say that he had a way when Li Shang appeared of her own accord and hugged Lu Yi with open arms. Lu Yi couldn't help but be taken aback for a moment. However, he quickly sensed something and revealed a joyful expression. He didn't know what this soul race woman was thinking. Why was she so cooperative this time? Without any resistance, Li Shang dove into Lu Ye's body and disappeared in an instant. However, Lu Yi could clearly sense a layer of strange power on the surface of his body, causing him to become illusory. This kind of nothingness was even more exquisite than his concealment and aura concealment spirit tattoos. Not only that, but when Li Shang fused with him, Lu Yi felt that his strength seemed to have increased tremendously. This was undoubtedly a unique ability of the soul race. Soul possession. The reason why the soul race was so coveted was because of this unique racial talent. They could attach themselves to any living being and increase the living being's strength. Moreover, they could also unleash some of the soul race's unique abilities. If that weren't the case, Li Shang wouldn't have sold for such a high price during the auction. The people from Room A6 had fought him to the point of over 30 million spirit jades before giving up. It could be said that if one had a soul race cultivator of similar cultivation by their side, their survivability and strength would be greatly enhanced no matter who they were. Lu Yi could sense that his strength had increased significantly. He had a feeling that even if Yu Yao, who had just ascended, was standing in front of him, he might still have a chance to kill her. The moment Li Shang attached himself to Lu Yi, the spore race constellation lost sight of Lu Ye's figure. She immediately understood where Lu Ye's confidence came from. With such a miraculous ability, he could indeed sneak into the Blood Sea without anyone noticing. She immediately said, "Then you must be careful, fellow Taoist." As soon as she finished speaking, the spore cloud in front of her suddenly became incomparably violent. It switched from defense to offense and frantically pounced toward the Blood Sea. When the huge commotion erupted, Lu Yi took the opportunity to dash forward and quickly charged into the Blood Sea. Under normal circumstances, even if Lu Yi had constructed his own concealment and aura-concealing spirit tattoos, there would still be a certain amount of risk involved. There was a good chance that the blood race constellation would detect his presence. However, right now, the blood race constellation was distracted and focused on resisting the spore cloud's counterattack. How could it have the spare energy to pay attention to anything else? Moreover, the soul race's unique abilities allowed Lu Yi to easily sneak into the Blood Sea by the time the spore race constellation stopped attacking. There were blood race cultivators everywhere in the Blood Sea. There wasn't just one constellation. What surprised Lu Yi was that not only were there constellations, but there were also Divine Sea and True Lake Realm cultivators. However, he didn't see a single Cloud River Realm cultivator. Perhaps the Cloud River Realm cultivators were too weak to be of much use in a battle like this. The blood race cultivators at the Divine Sea and True Lake Realm didn't need to do anything else. All they needed to do was activate their Blood River technique and fuse the four directions together. The ones who truly activated the Blood Seas might were the blood race constellations. Lu Yi came to a sudden realization. He knew that the Blood Sea was ridiculously large. As expected, it was a gathering of the power of many blood race cultivators. Not far from him was the blood race constellation that was fighting against the spore race constellation. The other party's cultivation wasn't bad, at least at the mid-stage of the star realm. However, if Lu Yi wanted to, he could easily kill him. Lu Yi wasn't in a hurry to do so. He had to figure out just how many blood race constellations there were in the Blood Sea. Lu Yi hated this race to the core. Since he had the opportunity, he naturally wanted to exterminate them. He roamed around the Blood Sea, investigating the distribution of the blood race's power. After spending the better part of a day, Lu Yi finally figured out the general situation. There were quite a few blood race constellations here. There were more than 50 of them. There were even more true lake and divine sea realm cultivators below the constellations. There were at least a few thousand of them. Lu Yi couldn't help but feel a headache coming on. He could ignore those true lake and divine sea realm cultivators. Without the power of a constellation, they wouldn't be able to leave this realm. As long as he took care of all the blood race constellations, they would be nothing more than lambs waiting to be slaughtered. However, there were more than 50 constellations scattered in different places. No matter how fast he attacked, he couldn't kill them all. It wouldn't work even if he summoned his doppelganger. Unless he could set up a trapping formation that enveloped the entire battlefield, making it impossible for them to escape. However, the blood race cultivators weren't idiots. They wouldn't let him set up a formation of this scale. It would take Lu Yi at least 1 or 2 months to set it up. He could only kill as many of them as he could. Just as Lu Yi was about to attack, a voice suddenly sounded in his ears. Why haven't the reinforcements arrived yet? These spore race cultivators are too difficult to deal with. Another voice sounded from nearby. I've received news that the reinforcements will arrive in 3 days. The voice from before said in a cold voice. Then let them live for 3 more days. With the blood race's current strength, they would be able to take down the Blue Jade realm. However, it would take a lot more time. Reinforcements, on the other hand, would greatly reduce the Blue Jade realm's progress. End of chapter. Chapter 1511. Lu Yi, who was about to attack, couldn't help but frown when he overheard their conversation. Vampire reinforcements were on the way, and they would arrive in 3 days. There was no way he could kill all the vampire constellations. Once he did, there was a good chance many of them would slip through the net and meet up with the reinforcements. That would be troublesome. After some thought, Lu Yi wasn't in a hurry to attack. Instead, he quietly flew away. The scale of the Blood Sea was very large. In order to take down the Blue Jade world, the Blood Tribe had mobilized a lot of people this time. Even though Lu Yi was currently possessed by Li Shang, it wasn't good for him to move too quickly, so it took him a full hour to sneak out of the Blood Sea. He was prepared to deal with the Blood Kindred's reinforcements first before dealing with the Blood Kindred that had invaded the Blue Jade world. Although that was what he was thinking, Lu Yi had no idea where the blood race had come from. He arrived at the Blue Jade realm and looked back. He found that the entire realm was different from most of the other realms he had encountered. It wasn't a spherical planet, but more like a giant floating continent. He didn't know what the original scenery of the Blue Jade realm was like, but from his current position, he could see that the entire realm was withered. Only the gathering place of the spore race and the wood spirit race was surrounded by a boundless sea of blood. After some thought, Lu Yi raised his hand and formed a clone. He wouldn't expose his avatar in front of outsiders, but he couldn't care less this time in order to block the vampire reinforcements. Moreover, Li Shang was a soul herself. Even if she had seen some of his secrets, she wouldn't have the opportunity to publicize them. Li Shang's soul had merged with Lu Ye's body, but that didn't affect her observation of the surroundings. She watched in astonishment as another Lu Yi appeared out of thin air. However, Li Shang only glanced at Lu Yi for a moment before looking away. Because this new Lu Yi wasn't wearing any clothes, he was completely naked. A clone? Li Shang couldn't understand. This was different from the clones she knew, because she could sense that this clone was no different from the main body. The clone had already put on his clothes and put on his sword gourd. The heroic sword cultivator had appeared out of thin air. The main body and avatar immediately split up and flew in different directions. This way, Lu Yi would be able to detect the vampire reinforcements no matter which direction they came from. About half a day's journey away from the Blue Jade realm, his main body and avatar cruised and searched. 2 days later, the main body finally discovered something. He looked up and saw a large group of blood-red figures rushing over from afar. They were the reinforcements of the blood race. Judging from the scale of the reinforcements, the number of reinforcements from the blood tribe should be quite large. However, compared to the ones besieging the Blue Jade realm, they were clearly much weaker. Lu Yi didn't have the opportunity to exterminate the vampires in the Blue Jade realm, but these reinforcements might be able to do so. He immediately activated his Blood River technique, slightly controlling the power of the Blood River technique, controlling the size of the blood sea to a similar size. At the same time, he activated his Holy Convergence technique, restraining his own holy nature. This was something that had to be done. Otherwise, the blood race would be able to sense it once his holiness manifested. Li Shang, who possessed Lu Ye's soul, immediately understood his plan. He was clearly pretending to be a vampire. One had to admit that the Blood Dao secret skill that Li Taibai activated was almost the same as the blood races. However, the Blood Dao secret skills that humans cultivated were ultimately different from the blood race's secret skills. Such a disguise didn't seem too obvious on the surface, but the blood race would definitely be able to sense it as soon as they came into close contact. She quietly prepared herself for a great battle, although she knew that the person who was chosen by the reincarnation tree would definitely be powerful. She had no idea exactly how powerful Lu Yi was. Ever since she followed Lu Yi, she had never seen him fight with her own eyes. She only felt that this was an extremely dangerous trip. Lu Yi urged the sea of blood in his body to meet the large expanse of blood. The blood-red figure had no intention of stopping him. In fact, it didn't even stop. Lu Ye's blood sea merged with it smoothly. The next moment, a voice came from not far away. "How's the situation in the Blue Jade realm?" Clearly, they had mistaken him as one of their people who had come from the Blue Jade realm to rescue them. Lu Yi replied casually, "It's a little difficult. The Spore tribe and Wood Spirit tribe won't submit to us no matter what. The Spore cloud's defense is tight, so it's difficult to break through." The voice scoffed. "The Spore tribe and Wood Spirit tribe are stubborn. Let's see how they're going to stop us once we break through their Spore cloud." Lu Yi said sinisterly, "Kill them until they turn the world upside down." However, the voice said, "These two tribes have some unique abilities. It's not good to kill them all. We'll have to keep some of them as pets later." The owner of the voice should be the blood race's leader, who was in charge of the reinforcement this time. He had a late-stage constellation cultivation base and was conversing with Lu Yi. However, they had no idea that Li Shang was confused at the moment. This was because she couldn't figure out why the blood race didn't see through Li Taibai's trick. Not only did they accept him smoothly, but they also treated him as a blood race member. Although many races in the Starry Sky cultivated Blood Dao secret techniques, the Blood Dao secret techniques cultivated by other races were fundamentally different from the blood race's secret techniques. Logically speaking, as long as Li Taibai's Blood Dao secret technique blended with the blood race's Blood Dao secret technique, the blood race should be able to detect it immediately. However, the blood race didn't know anything and treated him as one of their own. While she was still trying to figure it out, Lu Yi had already taken advantage of her conversation with the vampire to quietly spread out her own sea of blood, merging it with the surrounding blood. If he wanted to get rid of these blood race reinforcements in one fell swoop, then he had to have the ability to control this blood red. Simply put, he had to spread his blood sea and envelop all of the blood race reinforcements. If he succeeded, then all of the blood race members wouldn't be able to escape. He didn't do this in the Blue Jade realm because the blood sea was too large. It would be difficult for him to do it alone. However, the situation here was different. Although there were many blood race reinforcements, the blood red mass wasn't too large. He only needed a bit of time to spread his blood sea. While the blood sea was spreading, Lu Yi was also investigating the strength of these blood race reinforcements. There were quite a few constellation cultivators, including Divine Sea and True Lake stage blood race members. He was previously curious as to how these Divine Sea and True Lake blood race members could invade the Blue Jade realm. This was because without reaching the constellation stage, they didn't have the ability to travel through space physically. Only now did he know that the constellation blood race members had brought them here using this method. This wasn't a one-on-one battle. This was a battle between races. The blood race's blood arts were unique. In a battle like this, Divine Sea and True Lake stage blood race members could also play a significant role. Otherwise, it would be difficult to rely on Constellation Stage Blood Race members alone. Restrain your power, the Blood Race leader suddenly shouted, his tone filled with dissatisfaction. No matter how careful Lu Yi was spreading his blood sea, he couldn't hide it from the other Blood Race constellations. However, because they were all on the same side, the other Blood Race members didn't reject his spreading of his blood sea. However, as the leader of the reinforcements, the Blood Race constellation naturally couldn't allow Lu Yi to spread his blood sea too large and steal the limelight. All right, Lu Yi replied, but the speed at which his blood sea spread suddenly increased by a lot. What are you doing? The vampire manager shouted loudly. He felt that something wasn't quite right, and suddenly became vigilant. Who are you? He didn't pay much attention before, mainly because Lu Yi was obstructed by his blood sea, and he couldn't see Lu Ye's appearance clearly. Moreover, Lu Ye's blood arts were very authentic, so he naturally thought of him as a Blood Race member. Only now did he realize that Lu Ye's voice sounded very unfamiliar. There were only so many constellations, especially when Lu Yi was at the late stage. The Blood Race leader had never heard this voice before. Lu Yi ignored him and continued spreading his blood sea. However, it wasn't so easy this time. The Blood Race constellations were all on guard and wouldn't allow his blood sea to merge so easily. Lu Yi sighed inwardly. The Blood Tribe's manager was still a little vigilant. If he was given the time it took to brew a cup of tea, he would be able to completely spread out the blood sea. At that time, none of the Blood Tribe members here would be able to escape. At this time, his blood sea hadn't spread completely. It was only about 70%. Under the vigilant rejection of the Blood Race constellations, it wasn't quite possible to do the same thing again. Lu Yi hesitated no more. His figure flickered, and he charged toward the Blood Race leader. The Panshan blade was unsheathed, and blade light flashed. The Blood Race leader was stunned. He couldn't see Lu Ye's appearance because he was surrounded by his blood sea. But now that he was right in front of him, how could he not see him? A human! The Blood Race leader was extremely surprised. He never thought that the Blood Race member he had mistaken for was actually a human. He took a closer look and found this human's face to be very familiar. He was overjoyed. Lu Yi. As soon as these words came out, Lu Yi was startled. He was sure that he had never seen this Blood Race manager before. Moreover, ever since he left the 9 regions, he had always acted under the name of Li Baishuang. He had never told anyone his real name and origin. This guy actually knew his name, which really surprised Lu Yi. What he didn't know was that he had been targeted by the Blood Race ever since he slaughtered all the participating Blood Race cultivators during the battle at the reincarnation tree. The Blood Race had always occupied a large number of winning spots in the past Divine Sea battles, and those who won were the most talented of the Blood Race's younger generation. Not a single person from a dozen large domains was left alive, and there was no lack of saint seeds among them. How could the Blood Race let this matter rest? Moreover, Lu Yi had also killed a large number of the insect race's young Divine Sea experts. Only one had escaped the net. After the Divine Sea battle, the Blood Race and the insect race jointly issued a bounty for Lu Yi of the 9 heavens. Anyone who met him in the starry sky could go to the 2 races' domains and claim the astronomical reward if they killed him. Even Yu Yao couldn't ignore the bounty. Of course, due to the notorious reputation of the 2 races, how many people would be interested in such a bounty? At the very least, the insect race and the blood race were all paying attention to Lu Yi of the 9 heavens. End of chapter. Chapter 1512. Lu Ye's image had been seen by many insectoids and blood kindred powerhouses, and this blood kindred manager was one of them, which was why he could recognize him. Lu Yi had been in the Wanxiang Sea for a few years and had met many people, but he had never met insectoids or blood kindred. These 2 major races didn't have much space to live in a place like the Wanxiang Sea. Insectoids and blood kindred cultivators had only come to participate in the auction at the Constellation Hall. However, Lu Yi had appeared as Fa Wuzuan at that time, so he naturally wasn't recognized. This time, he had appeared in his original appearance, so the manager immediately recognized him and was overjoyed. Conquering the Blue Jade Realm, and enslaving the Spore tribe, and with spirits was an internal matter. But if he could take down Lu Ye of the 9 heavens, the reward would be his. Seeing Lu Ye's blade coming down, he raised his hand and grabbed at Lu Ye's face, his fingers glinting with a cold light. However, the next moment, the joy on his face disappeared and was replaced by deep shock. This was because the moment he attacked, an indescribable power suddenly filled the air. That power was so strong that it made his entire body tremble. Lu Ye's figure, which wasn't very tall, seemed infinitely taller in his eyes, like an irresistible god. Holiness, and it was unimaginably dense. This Lu Ye was actually a holy seed, and it was much more powerful than all the holy seeds he had seen before. In an instant, his mind was taken away, and the blood energy around him scattered. The claw at Lu Ye's face became weak and powerless. When Lu Ye's blade came down, it directly split this guy in half, as if he were chopping a piece of wood. His body swayed, and spatial spirit patterns flashed under his feet, and he disappeared from the spot. When he reappeared, he was in front of another blood-kindred constellation, and he also slashed down with his blade. Within the range of the Blood Sea, he could go anywhere he wanted with a single thought. Li Shang was stunned. She had originally thought that this would be a bitter battle, and that it would be extremely dangerous. But when Lu Yi really made his move, she realized that she had been overthinking things. This was because those blood race constellations had no power to resist at all in front of Lu Yi. Lu Yi wielded his blade and chopped them down one by one like chopping vegetables. She really couldn't understand how Lu Yi did it, because the Blood Clan's constellations were all panicking when facing Lu Yi. They probably didn't even use 30% of their strength. What made Li Shang even more shocked was Lu Ye's method of appearing and disappearing like a ghost. It was clearly some kind of teleportation method. Even if she was attached to Lu Ye's body, she could not perceive the mysteries behind it. The reinforcements from the kindred had brought quite a number of constellations this time. There were about 20 of them, but under the absolute suppression of their holiness, they couldn't withstand Lu Ye's attacks. In just a moment, nearly 10 people had died. Li Shang couldn't feel the holiness because she wasn't a vampire, but vampires could feel it clearly. The blood race had never understood how Lu Ye of the 9 heavens had wiped out the young elites of the blood race in the alpha origin stage. It wasn't until now that they finally understood. Lu Ye of the 9 heavens was a very powerful saint seed, and the strength of his holiness was unheard of. How could the blood race be his opponent in the face of such an enemy? The surviving blood race constellations immediately wanted to escape, but Lu Ye's previous deployment played a role. Under the cover of the sea of blood, the holiness spread. No matter what cultivation level those vampires had, most of their strength dissipated, and their bodies went soft. How could they escape? Only a few blood race constellations had a chance to escape, because they weren't enveloped by Lu Ye's sea of blood. They couldn't care less about their own clansmen. They only wanted to survive and escape from the sea of blood. A figure flashed beside Lu Yi, and his clone finally arrived. Previously, because the main body and the clone were in different positions and were too far away, the clone had been unable to teleport over through the void spirit runes. However, when the main body discovered the blood race reinforcements, the clone had already rushed over, and only arrived at the battlefield at this time. After Lu Yi took care of the remaining blood race constellations suppressed by the holiness, he immediately split up with his clone to chase after them. The blood race's blood escape technique was second to none in the universe, but Lu Yi also knew it, so the fleeing blood race had no advantage over him. Moreover, Lu Yi was currently in a state of possession by Li Shang, and his strength had skyrocketed. Thus, it didn't take long for him to catch up to the fleeing blood race constellation in front of him. Under the control of the Sea of Blood, he enveloped the blood race and ended his life with a single slash. Lu Yi didn't stop and chased in another direction. As the distance between them narrowed, the fleeing blood race constellation obviously knew that things weren't looking good. He suddenly stopped, turned around, and glared fiercely at Lu Yi. He gritted his teeth and said, "Lu Yi, the blood race won't rest until you die." As soon as he finished speaking, the blood around him surged as if his whole body was boiling. Under Lu Ye's astonished observation, the blood race constellation suddenly swelled and exploded into a pool of blood. Lu Yi frowned. He didn't expect this guy to be so unyielding. He knew he was no match for him and actually self-destructed. He vaguely felt that something was wrong, but he didn't have the time to think too much about it. He casually put away the blood crystal of the blood race and activated the void spirit pattern to teleport to where his clone was. His clone was chasing after a blood race constellation, and the sword chi from the sword gourd was attacking continuously, causing the blood race to be in a sorry state. When Lu Yi arrived, he joined forces with his clone and easily killed the blood race constellation. At this point, the blood race constellation that came to help had been completely annihilated. Without the constellation's protection, the Divine Ocean and True Lake blood race constellations they brought from this realm couldn't resist the corrosion of the cosmic energy at all. When Lu Yi chased after them, those Divine Ocean and True Lake blood race constellations had already struggled to death. As far as the eye could see, there were a large number of blood race corpses with faces of horror and despair. Their bodies stiffened, and there were at least a few thousand of them. When Lu Yi rushed back, he only collected the blood crystals from the constellations. As for the True Lake and Divine Ocean blood race constellations, he couldn't be bothered to deal with them. In the distant starry sky, in a realm occupied by the blood race, in a grand hall, blood-colored soul lamps swayed. Each soul lamp corresponded to a blood race cultivator. Under normal circumstances, these soul lamps were usually lit, which meant that the owner of the soul lamp was still alive. However, at this moment, a large number of soul lamps had been extinguished. The blood race cultivator guarding this place looked on with a pale face, and his body trembled slightly. This was because he discovered that among the extinguished soul lamps, there were more than 20 constellation soul lamps. This undoubtedly meant that those constellations were all dead. Most of the soul lamps had been extinguished silently. Only one soul lamp suddenly erupted with bright blood-colored light before extinguishing. Immediately after, the blood-colored light twisted and transformed, revealing the words "Lu Yi, we're in trouble." The blood race cultivator knew that this was a serious matter. Although this realm wasn't weak, losing so many constellations at once was still an indescribable pain. He didn't dare to delay, and hurriedly reported the matter. Soon, a blood race cultivator from Yuyao arrived. After listening to the cultivator's report, the blood race cultivator with a sinister expression asked, "The blood life technique revealed the words Lu Yi?" The cultivator hurriedly said, "It's Lu Yi, I didn't see wrong." The blood race cultivator snorted coldly. "You can wear out iron shoes in a fruitless search, only to find it so easily." In recent years, the blood race and the insect race had been searching for Lu Yi's whereabouts, but in the end, they hadn't found anything. Unexpectedly, one of their constellations had used the blood life technique to send back information before dying. The Battle of the Alpha Origin Divine Sea Realm had caused the blood race to suffer heavy losses. The younger generation of the blood race that they had placed high hopes on had all died at Lu Yi's hands. Normally speaking, it wouldn't matter if they died in such a battle. The blood race was also a large race with many talents, so it wouldn't have much of an impact if a few of them died. However, among the younger generation of the blood race, there was a holy seed. The blood race's holy blood was extremely precious. The blood race had issued such a bounty, not only because they wanted Lu Yi's life, but also because they wanted to recover the holy blood. That was the most precious treasure to the blood race. Now that he knew about Lu Yi's whereabouts, even Yuyao couldn't remain indifferent. Knowing that the dead blood race cultivators had all gone to the Blue Jade world, Yuyao didn't hesitate. She immediately soared into the sky and rushed in the direction of the Blue Jade world. Half a day later, Lu Yi returned to the Blue Jade world. The situation on the battlefield hadn't changed much, but the spore cloud's defensive range had clearly shrunk. Now that the reinforcements had been dealt with, Lu Yi only needed to deal with the blood race constellations in the Blue Jade world. Since he knew that he couldn't kill them all, Lu Yi didn't want to waste his energy. With Li Shang's abilities, he silently snuck into the Blood Sea and traveled several dozen kilometers. He found a blood race constellation that was controlling the Blood Sea to resist the spore cloud. He released his holy attribute, and then slashed down with his saber. The blood race cultivator didn't even have time to react before dying a violent death. He didn't even have time to scream. The blood race cultivators nearby were all shocked by the sudden death of the constellation's vitality. No one knew what had happened because the blood race hadn't suffered too many losses ever since they invaded the Blue Jade world. Although some Divine Sea and True Lake blood race cultivators had died in the battle against the Spore race and with spirits, not a single blood race cultivator had died. But now, one of them had died for no apparent reason. Just as the blood race cultivators were still trying to figure out what had happened, another constellation's aura suddenly disappeared. This was only the beginning. In the following period of time, more blood race constellations were mysteriously killed. In a short period of time, 7 or 8 of them had died. The remaining constellations were all terrified, and they activated their blood arts with all their might. Logically speaking, the blood race had extremely powerful observation and perception abilities in the blood sea. Any outsider who had infiltrated the blood sea would not be able to escape their senses. However, Wuxia himself could activate the most authentic blood arts. Therefore, even if the blood race cultivators sensed his presence, they would only treat him as a companion. As time passed, more and more blood race constellations died in battle. The remaining blood race cultivators finally realized that something was wrong with Wuxia. This was because wherever this person whom they mistook for one of their own went, a constellation would mysteriously die. End of chapter. Chapter 15:13. He then sensed Wuxia's aura, which was extremely unfamiliar. He wasn't a constellation from this realm at all. One of the vampires immediately shouted in Wuxia's direction, "Who are you?" There was no response. Instead, it led Wuxia straight to where he was. "You're courting death." The vampire was furious. He didn't dodge and charged at Wuxia. Although Wuxia had killed many vampires before, his cultivation was only at the constellation level. This vampire wasn't afraid, and only thought that Wuxia was able to succeed because of a sneak attack. Now that he knew Wuxia wasn't one of them, he wouldn't follow in his clansman's footsteps as long as he was prepared. In the blink of an eye, the two figures in the vast sea of blood collided. The vampire constellation only saw a few exquisite saber lights coming at him before he lost consciousness. They were both late-stage constellations, but how could he be Wuxia's match in a one-on-one fight? Moreover, Wuxia was currently possessed by Li Shang, which made him even more powerful. The nearby vampire constellations were all shocked when they sensed the situation here. They all thought Wuxia was invincible because of a sneak attack. Only now did they realize that this unknown enemy was actually so powerful. Their clansmen of the same cultivation level couldn't even last a single exchange in front of him. They didn't dare to be careless and gathered around Wuxia. Clearly, they planned to encircle and annihilate him. Wuxia was delighted when he saw this. He didn't think he could kill all the vampire constellations here, so he didn't bother spreading his sea of blood. However, these vampire constellations actually took the initiative to encircle and annihilate him. This was a good opportunity. He wasn't in a hurry to activate his saintly nature. Instead, he kept it concealed with the Holy Convergence art and fought fiercely with the vampire constellations. He was outnumbered. Even with Li Shang's possession, Wuxia was still in a perilous situation. Wounds appeared all over his body. He suppressed his killing intent and didn't kill any of the vampire constellations. He only fought them with all his might, acting as if he couldn't hold on any longer. The vampire constellations saw hope and attacked even more fiercely. However, they still couldn't really succeed. More blood race constellations joined the fray, wanting to get rid of Wuxia as quickly as possible. Because most of the constellations were tied down by Wuxia, the blood sea was already at a disadvantage against the spore cloud. If they wanted to change the situation, they had to kill Wuxia first. Wuxia's situation was getting worse. Under the siege of so many star mansions, what he could do was very limited. He could only repeatedly activate the Holy Guardian Spirit rune to protect himself. Wuxia reckoned that it was about time, and that he really couldn't hold on any longer. Only then did he release the Holy Convergence technique's suppression, and an incomparably dense holy aura spread out with a loud rumble. The expressions of the vampire constellations in the surroundings changed drastically. Their minds were thrown into disarray, and their blood energy scattered. They instantly became limp shrimps. Killing intent blossomed. Lu Yi had endured them for so long, almost being beaten black and blue all over, all for this moment. How could he be lenient? The light of the sun exploded, and a lotus flower slowly bloomed. The petals formed by the saber light danced and attacked in all directions. All the vampire constellations that came into contact with it were unable to block it. In an instant, powerful auras were annihilated one after another. Lu Yi didn't stop, and charged toward the nearest vampire. That vampire's eyes were filled with fear and disbelief. Seeing the bright saber light slashing down, he wanted to dodge, but his body was weak and powerless. There was no way he could dodge at all. The vampire constellations that participated in the encirclement of Lu Yi fell one after another, and the blood sea seemed to become even thicker. And without the support of these vampire constellations, the blood sea was no longer able to stop the spore cloud's counterattack. The spore cloud that had been suppressed for a while now seemed to have the help of a god. It swept outwards, and miserable cries sounded one after another. Those cries came from the divine ocean and true lake blood race in the blood sea. Originally, with the constellation realm cultivators blocking in front and activating the might of the blood sea, they weren't in any danger. They only needed to provide support for the blood sea. However, most of the constellations were already dead. How could they stop it by themselves? Within the spore cloud, the furious roars of the spore race and wood spirit cultivators could be heard as they pushed forward unstoppably. Not all of the vampire constellations that participated in the encirclement of Lu Yi. There were some who didn't participate. Seeing that the situation was hopeless, they didn't dare to linger and fled from the blood sea. Just as they left the blood sea, they saw another blood sea falling from the sky. These vampire constellations were overjoyed and rushed over to greet them. Some of them even cried out, "Reinforcements are here!" The timing of the reinforcements matched the information they had received. Thus, these vampire constellations didn't raise their guard at all and rushed into the blood sea. Within the blood sea, Lu Yi's clone wore a strange expression. He had never seen people rushing to their deaths like this. The clone had stayed here mainly to kill some who had slipped through the net, but he didn't expect them to take him as reinforcements and come to him of their own accord. This saved him a lot of trouble. Only when the vampires rushed into the blood sea did they realize that something was wrong. Although the blood sea wasn't small, there was no sign of any of their kind inside. There was only a late-stage constellation aura. Most importantly, the aura they sensed was exactly the same as that of the guy who was massacring the vampires below. Before they could figure out what was going on, the boundless blood sea suddenly erupted with a powerful holy aura. The clone activated the sword gourd's might and sent out streaks of sword chi in all directions. Lu Yi's main body had also teleported over with the help of the spatial spirit patterns. Working together with his clone, it only took a moment for them to wipe out all the fleeing vampire constellations. Lu Yi stood in the air after the blood sea retracted, looking down with an indifferent gaze. He had already recalled his clone. Through his perception, he could sense that there were no longer any auras of vampire constellations in the blood sea. Only a few divine sea and true lake vampires remained. Although there were quite a few of them, they would be wiped out sooner or later under the counterattack of the spore race and wood spirit race. At this point, there was no need for him to intervene. Half a day later, the battle came to an end. The vampires who had lost the protection of the constellations were indeed wiped out. The spore cloud had disappeared, and the earth was covered in a thick layer of blood. The spore race and wood spirit race roared into the sky. Lu Yi felt no joy, only sorrow. Although they had won this battle with Lu Yi's help and killed all the invaders, the realm where they lived had already been exposed to the vampires. The vampires wouldn't let this matter rest. They would return sooner or later. It was with this in mind that the two races decided to move their people into the reincarnation tree's tree realm. In this world, only the reincarnation tree's tree realm could provide them with a temporary peaceful environment. Lu Yi was silently recuperating in a huge treehouse. He had been injured frequently when he was surrounded by the vampires, but they were all superficial wounds, so he recovered very quickly. Li Shang was standing not far away, protecting him like a guard. The Spore People's chief, Black Umbrella, and the Wood Spirits chief, Mu He, had just arrived to express their sincere gratitude to Lu Yi and Li Shang. They had originally thought that the reincarnation tree would send 2 people over. But who would have thought that these 2 people would be able to defeat the vampires like a landslide? They had no idea how Lu Yi and Li Shang had done it, nor did they need to know. Now that the crisis had been averted, the 2 races were already preparing to move. Thankfully, there weren't too many people in the 2 races, so the migration wasn't too troublesome. Another day later, the 2 races had finished their preparations, and a large number of their people had gathered together. Lu Yi stood quietly off to the side. To be honest, he was a little curious about how the Spore race and Wood Spirit race were going to move. The 2 races had constellations, but most of them were below the constellation level, so they couldn't travel through space with their physical bodies. Lu Yi reckoned that they would need to use a large planetary ship. Only then would they be able to move so many people below the constellation level. However, if that was the case, then they would need a lot of planetary ships. Did the Spore race and Wood Spirit race have the financial resources to do so? However, Lu Yi soon realized that he was wrong. The 2 races weren't going to use planetary ships, but rather the Spore Cloud. Under the combined efforts of the cultivators of the 2 races, a large spore cloud began to spread, enveloping all of their people within. Then, the spore cloud that enveloped the people of the 2 races rose into the air and drifted out of the realm. This method was somewhat similar to that of the vampires. The vampires had used the Blood Sea to bring the Divine Sea and True Lake tribe members over, while the Spore race and Wood Spirit race had used the Spore Cloud. Both the Blood Sea and the Spore Cloud were clearly able to protect all living beings below the constellation level. The giant Spore Cloud rushed out of the realm. From afar, it looked like a giant piece of cotton candy. Some of the Spore race and Wood Spirit race's constellations looked through the Spore Cloud in the direction of the Blue Jade realm, with reluctance and resignation. After all, this was a realm that they had lived in for many years. Now that they had to abandon it, they naturally didn't feel good about it. However, now that the vampires had discovered their realm, it was no longer appropriate for them to stay. Lu Yi also landed in the Spore Cloud and moved along with it. At the same time, he was also guiding the cultivators of the 2 races. He didn't know the exact route from the Blue Jade realm to the reincarnation tree, but he could sense the direction of the reincarnation tree through the imprint on the back of his hand. Therefore, he was the only one who could lead the way. This trip would take at least half a year. Under the combined efforts of the 2 races' constellations, the Spore Cloud moved very quickly. Lu Yi estimated that it wouldn't be any slower than his own planetary ship. The migration officially began. Mu He and Black Umbrella came together to express their gratitude to Lu Yi and Li Shang again. At the same time, they brought some gifts as well. After all, if it weren't for Lu Yi and Li Shang's divine soldiers, the 2 races would have most likely been wiped out. After chatting with the 2 clan leaders for a while, they finally left. There were many people who needed to be comforted, and they also had to be vigilant of the dangers they might encounter along the way. The 2 clan leaders didn't want to stay with Lu Yi for too long. After they left, Lu Yi looked at the gifts they brought. They were 2 green crystals. Lu Yi didn't know what they were, but if the 2 clan leaders brought them out as gifts, they definitely weren't ordinary items. End of chapter. Chapter 15-14. Lu Yi sensed that these 2 green crystals contained an enormous amount of energy, but they were very gentle and contained a rich vitality. This thing could probably be used to heal injuries. The effects might be quite good. However, if that was all, this item wasn't very valuable. After all, this was a gift of gratitude. So Lu Yi couldn't ask the 2 tribe leaders about it in front of them. Just as he was puzzled, he heard Li Shang say, "These are the wood crystals left behind by wood spirits after they die." She clearly recognized this item. Ever since she received Li Shang, this soul tribe woman had never taken the initiative to speak to Lu Yi. She usually remained silent, as if she were mute. She was wary of Lu Yi, and even a little hostile toward him. However, ever since she was summoned by the reincarnation tree, Lu Yi clearly sensed that her attitude had changed. Although he didn't know the reason, this was a good thing for him. Li Shang had even taken the initiative to use a soul-binding mystic technique on him, to help him kill his enemies. Lu Yi had always wanted to be honest with Li Shang, because the problem of the martyrs in Immortal Essence City might have to be solved through the Soul Tribe. Li Shang's change in attitude gave Lu Yi hope. The wood crystals left behind by wood spirits after they die? Are they the same as the crystal cores of star beasts and blood crystals of the blood tribe? Lu Yi asked. Li Shang nodded. That's right. However, the wood crystals of wood spirits are much more valuable and rare than crystal cores and blood crystals. Not all wood spirits leave behind wood crystals after they die. Only a small portion of them do. What are they used for? Lu Yi asked humbly. Wood crystals contain a large amount of pure energy. Refining them can increase one's vitality and refine the essence of one's flesh and blood. She carefully looked at the 2 wood crystals in Lu Ye's hand. These 2 wood crystals should be left behind by the wood spirits of the Moon Jade realm. If you refine them, it won't take long for you to reach the peak of the constellation realm. Lu Yi couldn't help but feel a little disappointed. It was undeniable that wood crystals were good things. They could save time and greatly increase one's cultivation speed. Moreover, these 2 wood crystals were left behind by the wood spirits of the Moon Jade realm. The Moon Jade realm didn't exist in the Wood Spirit clan, so these were probably left behind by their ancestors. They were probably the most precious treasures of the Wood Spirit clan. The Wood Spirit's sincerity in giving these things as a gift. However, Lu Yi didn't need them. If he really wanted to cultivate quickly, he could just jump into the Myriad Sea. Why would he need wood crystals? Seemingly seeing the disappointment on Lu Ye's face, Li Shang continued. The wood spirit's wood crystal has a mysterious power. Not only can it be used to refine flesh and blood essence, but if you refine it, you will be able to comprehend wood attribute secret techniques with half the effort. Lu Yi didn't need to comprehend any wood attribute secret techniques. His own power was of the fire attribute, so it could be said that it had nothing to do with wood attribute techniques. There was a leaf dance spirit rune on the talent tree. It was considered to be of the wood attribute, but Lu Yi had never used it before. This was because he used fire attribute spirit energy to activate it. Not only was it nondescript, but it also felt a little obscure. Nothing else. Lu Yi asked. Li Shang thought for a moment. You humans have a faction called medical cultivators. If you let the medical cultivators cultivate wood crystals, their ability to treat others will be greatly improved. This thing can be said to be the most precious treasure that every medical cultivator dreams of. Lu Ye's eyes lit up. He was not a medical cultivator, but second senior sister and Hua Si were. It would be a good gift to give them these 2 wood crystals. Firstly, it could help them improve their cultivation and shorten their cultivation progress. Secondly, it could also improve their medical cultivation abilities. The 2 wood crystals should belong to Lu Yi and Li Shang. Lu Yi looked at Li Shang. How about we make a deal? What? Li Shang looked at him. I'll take the wood crystals. If you want something, I'll give it to you in exchange. Li Shang finally understood Lu Ye's intentions. He shook his head. Even without me, you would have been invincible. This is a gift from the Wood Spirit clan and the Spore race. It has nothing to do with me. She still didn't understand why the blood race's constellations were like mice in front of a cat when facing Lu Yi. Their strength was greatly suppressed. This was Lu Ye's secret, so she didn't plan on asking. But she knew that even if she wasn't possessed, it wouldn't take much effort for Lu Yi to deal with those vampires. That may be the case, but you do have one of these wood crystals. The Spore race and the Wood Spirit clan didn't know the real situation of the battle. They only thought that Lu Yi and Li Shang worked together, so they sent 2 wood crystals. Li Shang shook his head. I don't want anything. If you insist on giving it to me, I hope you can release my seal. Lu Yi quietly looked at him for a moment before suddenly raising his hand and tossing a token to Li Shang. This was the token that controlled her seal. Li Shang had only said it casually. He didn't expect Lu Yi to really give it to him. After receiving the token, he couldn't help but be stunned. With a complicated expression, he asked, "Aren't you afraid I'll run away?" Lu Yi said seriously, "I have something I need your help with. Moreover, you should be able to sense that I have no ill intentions towards you." Since he wanted to ask for help, he naturally needed to discuss it with him. If he used the seal to control Li Shang wouldn't be willing to cooperate with him. Lu Yi has been thinking about finding a suitable opportunity to undo her restriction. But if he hastily undid it without gaining her trust, and having a certain foundation of communication, Li Shang would definitely run away. Perhaps now was an opportunity. Lu Yi could only take a gamble. Taking a deep look at Lu Yi, Li Shang crushed the token in his hand. An unknown force seemed to be released from Li Shang's body, making her feel much more relaxed. She didn't have any intention of running away. Instead, she sat down not far from Lu Yi and said, "Tell me about your friend's situation." Before, Lu Yi had casually mentioned it and didn't explain it clearly, so Li Shang was too lazy to understand. Now that she took the initiative to ask, it was undoubtedly a good thing for Lu Yi. Lu Yi briefly explained the situation in Immortal Essence City. Hearing this, Li Shang nodded. Using soul-cleansing water to maintain one's soul is a good method. This method has both advantages and disadvantages. The advantage is that the soul imprint doesn't disappear. Even if one's soul is scattered, they can use the power of soul-cleansing water to reform their soul body. The disadvantage is that they can't be free, which is equivalent to being trapped. Your friends should have been very determined when they were alive. Otherwise, they wouldn't have been able to hold on for too long before their souls became chaotic. Lu Yi thought about the group of people in Immortal Essence City and nodded. They are a group of admirable ancestors. He humbly asked for advice. Is there a way to solve this problem? Li Shang pondered for a moment and said, I'll have to take a look to know the specific situation. When this is over, take me there. Okay, then I'll have to trouble you. Lu Yi excitedly agreed. In the past, he didn't know how to return to the 9 states. But this time, as long as he completed the reincarnation tree's request, he could ask for information about the 9 states. He would definitely be able to find a way back to the 9 states. With the reincarnation tree's ability to spread across the starry sky, this shouldn't be a problem for it. The journey wasn't peaceful. From time to time, star beasts would come to harass them, but they were all repelled by the joint forces of the spore race and the wood spirit constellations. Some star beasts actually didn't have any malicious intentions. It was just that things like spore clouds were basically impossible to find in the starry sky, so the star beasts would come over to take a look out of curiosity. During this time, they even encountered a moon jade realm star beast. The star beast was extremely large, like a whale cruising through the starry sky. Furthermore, this star beast had 3 small whale star beasts with it. It was most likely a family of 4. The spore race and wood spirit constellations were all very nervous against the moon jade realm star beasts. Even if they worked together, they would definitely suffer heavy casualties. In the end, Lu Yi had to step in and use the might of his red talisman to hold off the family of 4 for a long time before they finally retreated. As long as the red talisman wasn't completely activated, it wouldn't be a problem. As long as it was activated slightly, it would be enough to force the star beasts to retreat. This method could only be used against star beasts. If it were a cultivator, they would only covet it even more. After witnessing the terrifying might of the red talisman, Li Shang was even more confused about Lu Yi. She naturally recognized that the red talisman was from the humanoid race. Otherwise, it wouldn't have been so powerful. However, Lu Yi didn't look like he came from a top-tier realm, so she didn't know why he had a red talisman on him. Moreover, he was valued by the reincarnation tree and was bestowed with a mark. After traveling for more than 3 months, Lu Yi sensed that the reincarnation tree's mark was becoming more and more connected to the area ahead. He knew that he was getting closer and closer to the reincarnation tree. During these 3 months, his relationship with Li Shang had improved significantly. Although they weren't friends yet, they could at least chat for a while. Lu Yi had asked her about concealment before, and he discovered that the soul race's concealment was different from that of ghost cultivators. Ghost cultivators relied on the power of ghostly tattoos to conceal themselves, while the soul race's concealment was an innate ability. This was because they were existences that were both intangible and corporeal. It was extremely mysterious. Liu Ye's original plan to borrow the soul race's power to reconstruct his concealment spiritual tattoos was ruined. On this day, Liu Ye was refining spirit jade and cultivating when his heart suddenly skipped a beat. He felt as if some kind of danger was approaching. He hurriedly opened his eyes and saw that Li Shang had also opened her eyes and was looking at him with a grave expression. Li Shang also sensed something. She wasn't the only one who sensed it. The spore race and wood spirit constellations in the spore cloud also sensed it. Liu Ye hurriedly jumped out of the spore cloud and turned back to look. In his field of vision, he saw a blood-red light approaching at an extremely fast speed. Li Shang stood beside him with a grave expression. It's Yu Yao of the blood race. Moreover, judging from her aura, she wasn't an ordinary Yu Yao. At the very least, she was a mid-stage Yu Yao. She might even be a late-stage Yu Yao. It had already been 3 months since he left the Blue Jade realm. Liu Ye had never imagined that a powerful blood race cultivator would come after him. With his current strength, he would be under great pressure even if he faced Yu Yao, who had just ascended, let alone a mid-stage or late-stage Yu Yao. Black Umbrella and Mu He also arrived together. When they saw the blood-red light behind them, their expressions changed. This was the tragedy of a small race. Without a powerful cultivator to oversee them, they were basically powerless to fight back when they encountered danger in this boundless starry sky. A single mistake could lead to the extinction of their race. End of chapter. Chapter 15:15. Liu Ye's expression was grave as he watched the approaching crimson light. Thoughts churned in his mind as he tried to think of a way to defeat the enemy. Using the twin chi-connected formation disc might be a solution. The wood spirits and the spore race had a few late-stage constellations, so they could definitely gather enough manpower to form the black tortoise formation. But even so, could they really contend against Yu Yao's mid-stage or late-stage constellations? A group of late-stage constellations could probably contend against Yu Yao's early-stage constellations, but it would be far too difficult to deal with a mid-stage or late-stage constellation. Moreover, if the wood spirits and spore race's late-stage constellations were to be mobilized, it might affect the stability of the spore cloud. The spore cloud was only able to protect the members of the two races, because all the constellations of the two races were working together to control it. If the spore cloud lost its stability, the two races might suffer heavy casualties. As such, Liu Ye only pondered for a moment before dismissing the idea of borrowing strength from the wood spirits and spore race. He could only use this as his final backup plan. Since that was the case, he could only fight Yu Yao alone. Fortunately, his opponent was a blood tribe member, so he had a huge advantage against blood tribe members. Moreover, he wasn't alone, so Li Shang could provide him with considerable assistance. He made up his mind and transmitted his voice to Mu He and Black Umbrella. Take your clansmen and leave first. I'll stop him. If they really couldn't stop him, then they would have to work together with the spore race and wood spirits. With that, he took the initiative to charge forward. Li Shang didn't say a word as he opened his arms and dove into Liu Ye's body. Mu He and Black Umbrella couldn't stop him in time. They could only watch as Liu Ye rushed forward. Gritting his teeth, he activated the spore cloud with all his might and fled. Shui Hao saw the spore cloud from afar, and his eyes were filled with cold, killing intent. He had set out from this realm and rushed to the Blue Jade realm first, but there was no one there. There were only a large number of blood tribe corpses left behind, which filled him with grief. He chased after them without stopping because he knew that the spore race and wood spirits would seek refuge with the reincarnation tree. So he didn't change his direction. After a long time, he finally caught up to them. At this moment, seeing a stream of light rushing out from the spore cloud towards him, Shui Hao hurriedly activated his vision to take a look. With a glance, he was overjoyed because he saw the figure that many of his clan's powerhouses had been yearning for in the stream of light. Before his clan's star constellation died, she used the blood life technique to send back information. that Wuxia of the Nine Heavens was indeed here. His trip here was not in vain. Wuxia's expression became even more serious as he gradually discovered that this blood tribe member was at the late stage of the Moon Jade realm. They were in big trouble now. If Wuxia was only at the middle stage, he might have a chance. But Wuxia was at the late stage, so he wasn't sure. But now that things had come to this, there was no way to retreat. He could only brace himself and go forward. A dense bloody light suddenly blossomed from Shuehao's body, transforming into a bloody cloud. Even though he was at the late stage of the Moon Jade realm, against a late-stage star constellation, he couldn't afford to be careless. Wuxia of the Nine Heavens was too important, so he had to capture him as soon as possible and put an end to any thoughts of escape. That was why he had activated his blood art to prevent Wuxia from fleeing. Otherwise, he wouldn't have needed to make such a grand display against a junior who was far weaker than him. He activated the bloody cloud on his side, filling the air with a heaven-encompassing aura. Suddenly, his expression froze as he saw a surge of bloody light blossoming in front of him, also transforming into a bloody cloud in an extremely short amount of time. This Wuxia actually cultivated a Blood Dao secret art. Shuehao snorted coldly. How laughable! Blood Dao secret arts originated from the Blood tribe. The Blood Dao secret arts cultivated by the various major races were all adapted from the Blood tribe's secret arts. Anyone with a bit of common sense would know that one shouldn't play around with Blood Dao secret arts in front of a Blood tribe member. Otherwise, they would be the one to suffer. However, Shuehao had to admit that Wuxia's attainments in Blood Dao secret arts were extremely profound. This could be seen from the size and scale of the bloody cloud. Even the late-stage star constellation of the Blood tribe couldn't compare to Wuxia's Blood Dao secret arts. This probably wasn't just a matter of how high one's attainments were. It also had a lot to do with the abundance of Wuxia's blood and qi. This isn't bad. Once I capture Wuxia, I'll absorb his saint blood and devour his blood and qi. It'll be a small supplement, Shuehao thought to himself. In the starry sky, the two bloody seas collided. There was no suspense. Wuxia's bloody cloud was instantly at a disadvantage. As the boundless bloody light spread out, his bloody sea shattered. Before it could reform, it was swallowed up by Shuehao's bloody sea. Within the bloody sea, Wuxia's blood and qi surged. He immediately sensed the huge gap between himself and the late-stage Moon Jade. If he was a blade of grass, then Moon Jade was a large tree. Whether it was in terms of strength or aura, there was simply no comparison. Even though he had expected this, when the result appeared before his eyes, Wuxia's expression still looked somewhat helpless. A bone-chilling feeling rose in his heart. Wuxia sensed a brilliant and fierce aura coming straight for him. He raised his hand and pressed it against the hilt of his mountain pan saber. His gaze was fixed in front of him as he madly poured his spiritual power into the saber. Spiritual inscriptions quickly formed on the mountain pan saber. Suddenly the saber was unsheathed. It spun like a crescent moon and slashed forward. Shuehao sneered. The huge gap in their strength made it so that he didn't even think about dodging this attack. He didn't even try to dodge. Instead, he reached out to grab the saber. He wanted to let Wuxia experience what despair was. However, in the next instant his sneer turned into shock. This was because an inexplicable might had suddenly erupted from Wuxia's body. Under the impact of this inexplicable might, Shuehao's blood and qi scattered. His strength was also greatly suppressed. The incomparably sharp mountain pan saber slashed down. It was as if it had struck a thick sheet of leather. Blood splattered everywhere. Shuehao cried out in shock and retracted his hand. A deep wound had appeared between his fingers, so deep that his bones could be seen. Wuxia had already pressed forward. His aura was tyrannical and wild as he continuously displayed the tyrant saber technique. With the assistance of Li Shang's soul attachment, every strike was practically an all-out attack. Shuehao continuously retreated. His eyes trembled violently as he stared at Wuxia in disbelief. You're a holy seed? You're actually a holy seed? In the blood race, only those who had refined sacred blood could be called holy seeds. Shuehao himself was a holy seed, and he had also refined sacred blood. Otherwise, he wouldn't have been able to achieve what he had today. However, He had never imagined that this Lu Ye of the Nine Heavens, who had been remembered by his clan for many years, was also a holy seed. Moreover, his holy nature far surpassed his own. Not only was Lu Ye's holy nature superior to his own, but there was also a large gap between them. Even Rizhao, the person with the strongest holy nature he had ever seen, wasn't even worthy of carrying Lu Ye's shoes. Xuehao couldn't believe it, but now that he had personally experienced it, he had no choice but to believe it. Under the intense suppression of Lu Ye's holy nature, his late-stage Yu Yao cultivation could only display the strength of an early-stage Yu Yao cultivator. This kind of suppression was too terrifying. Even Rizhao, who he had seen before, couldn't achieve this level of suppression. As soon as he said this, he realized that something was wrong. Lu Ye was clearly a human. How could he be a holy seed? Following that, an inconceivable thought surfaced in his mind. You can actually refine sacred blood? Lu Ye's holy nature wasn't fake. Since he wasn't a blood race holy seed, that meant that he had the means to refine sacred blood. But, was that possible? The blood race's sacred blood came from a mysterious source. Even a blood race member would have to take a great deal of risk in order to refine it. If any other race were to come into contact with it, even Rizhao would die without a doubt. But now, a human who had refined sacred blood was standing right in front of him, using the suppression of his holy nature to restrain him. From the looks of it, Lu Ye had already refined the sacred blood of the holy seeds of the younger generation, who had died at his hands in the alpha origin stage. It could even be said that Lu Ye had already refined a lot of sacred blood before this. Otherwise, his holy nature wouldn't be so terrifying. Xuehao finally understood how those holy seeds of the younger generation had died in the alpha origin stage. All this time, the blood race didn't know how those younger generation had been completely annihilated by a human. This was because the blood race had arranged for those younger generation to quickly gather in the alpha origin stage and work together to resist the enemy. The other Divine Sea cultivators participating in the battle for the Divine Sea were simply unable to resist. It was precisely because of this method that the blood race was able to occupy a portion of the winning spots in the alpha origin stage every time. But if Lu Ye relied on the suppression of his holy nature, those younger generation wouldn't be able to resist. Moreover, if they gathered together, it would be easier for Lu Ye to wipe them all out. After understanding so many things, the shock in Xuehao's eyes gradually turned into excitement. This was because he saw the possibility of refining a large amount of sacred blood from Lu Ye. The process of refining sacred blood was too dangerous for the blood race, and it had nothing to do with one's cultivation. Even an advanced Yu Yao like him couldn't refine too much sacred blood. Every refinement was a life and death crisis. A human had actually done something that was difficult for the blood race. Xuehao really wanted to know how Lu Ye had done it. Based on the holy nature on Lu Ye's body, he had refined at least a few dozen drops of sacred blood, perhaps even more. Therefore, as long as he captured Lu Ye, Xuehao would have the opportunity to pry into this secret and use it to raise his holy nature. Sunshine was just around the corner. While many thoughts flashed through his mind, Lu Ye's blade continued to attack, forcing him back step by step. It wasn't that Xuehao was weaker than him, but that Xuehao was thinking about how to capture Lu Ye alive. Under the suppression of Lu Ye's holy nature, Lu Ye could clearly sense that his opponent could only unleash the power of an advanced Yu Yao's cultivation. This greatly reassured him. Even if he wasn't a match for an advanced Yu Yao, the situation wouldn't be too bad. If he really couldn't do it, he could use the red talisman to deal with Lu Ye. However, the red talisman was Lu Ye's final trump card. Unless it was absolutely necessary, Lu Ye wouldn't be willing to use it. As they clashed, boundless saber light enveloped Xuehao. However, Lu Ye's mood gradually became heavier and heavier. This was because apart from the first saber strike that had injured Xuehao, the rest of his attacks didn't have much of an effect. Lu Ye suddenly realized that he had underestimated the situation. End of chapter. Chapter 15-16. Under the suppression of the saint attribute, Xuehao could only unleash the power of an early Yuyao cultivator. However, this did not mean that he was truly only at the early Yuyao stage. He still had the foundation of a late Yuyao cultivator. After all, especially that powerful physique of his. Because the blood race cultivated blood arts, their physiques were generally stronger than those of other races, let alone someone like Xuehao. This could be seen from the fact that Xuehao was not seriously injured when he was struck by Lu Ye's full-strength saber. If his physique was not strong enough, that saber strike would have crippled one of Xuehao's arms. It was precisely because his physique was strong enough that he could block that sharp saber strike. This was the situation that Lu Yi was currently in. Xuehao was prepared. So even if he used his full strength under the enhancement of Li Shang's soul possession, he could only break through the blood-colored barrier around Xuehao's body and leave shallow wounds on him. He could not cause him any serious injuries at all. Xuehao did not counterattack. He tried his best to avoid Lu Ye's attacks, and only took them head-on when he really could not. However, those shallow wounds were no different from scratching an itch to an elite like him. Moreover, he was full of vitality, and his physique had long since been refined to the extreme. So in the blink of an eye, those wounds had already healed. Lu Yi slashed out over 100 times, but to no avail. Xuehao suddenly grinned at him. It's my turn. He wanted to capture Lu Yi alive and find out the secret of refining sacred blood. Otherwise, how could he allow a star constellation to act so impudently in front of him? Since he wanted to capture him alive, he naturally had to wear down his opponent's strength and fighting spirit. This was the reason why he had let Lu Yi go all out. He wanted Lu Yi to see the disparity in their strength with his own eyes. It was about time now. When he finished speaking, Xuehao had already launched a punch. Lu Yi's expression was serious. This punch looked ordinary, but he felt a great threat from it. He hurriedly raised his saber in front of him. When the huge force hit him, he felt as if a star had crashed into his body, and his body flew back uncontrollably. Xuehao, on the other hand, did not show any mercy after gaining the upper hand. He followed closely behind like a maggot, and his two fists smashed down like a storm. Although Lu Yi tried his best to resist, how could he withstand such an attack? He was momentarily dazed and hurriedly switched to a defensive stance, constructing holy protection spirit inscriptions one after another. However, even the Holy Guard could not withstand Xuehao's attacks. Almost every layer that appeared was destroyed. In just a short period of time, Lu Yi had lost count of how many punches he had received. The blood in his chest was surging, and the taste of blood filled his throat. Several of his bones had been broken. Xuehao retracted his hand and looked at Lu Yi indifferently. Surrender. I don't want to kill you. A human who could refine large amounts of sacred blood was simply too precious. No matter what, he had to figure out Lu Yi's secrets. Before that, how could Xuehao bear to let Lu Yi die? Lu Yi didn't say anything. He just raised his hand and wiped the blood from the corner of his mouth. He slowly raised his left hand and pressed on his right wrist to stop it from trembling. His eyes were resolute and firm. He had to find an opportunity to use the red talisman. Otherwise, he would not be a match for Yu Yao of the blood tribe with his own strength. However, using the red talisman required some time. Before that, he could not let Xuehao notice anything amiss. He took a step forward and arrived in front of Xuehao, slashing out with a continuous stream of saber light. Xuehao shook his head slowly, stubborn. He raised his fist and attacked again. Saber light flashed as fists rained down. The two figures attacked each other furiously, but Lu Ye's attacks were nothing compared to Xuehao's. Yu Yao's late-stage physique was not something Lu Yi could shake as he wished. Instead, it was Xuehao's fists that caused Lu Ye's body to tremble. Lu Yi was at a disadvantage from the start, and the situation was getting worse and worse. This was a huge gap in their foundations. It was not something external power could make up for. The coiling mountain saber enhanced with the divine edge spirit inscriptions was sharp enough. Very few people of the same level could block the coiling mountain saber's attacks. However, Xuehao only needed to rely on some simple blood energy protection and his own powerful physique to render Lu Ye's attacks useless. It was also thanks to the suppression of Xuehao's saintly nature that caused Xuehao's strength to plummet. Otherwise, he would not have been able to fight this battle at all. Amidst the intense battle, Lu Yi was already secretly channeling his spiritual power into the red talisman hidden within his body. However, he did not dare to move too much, in case Xue Hao noticed something. Thus, he still needed some time to activate the red talisman's might. Lu Yi did not even know if he would be able to last until then. His situation was getting worse and worse. His vision had already become blurry, and the blood flowing from his forehead had dyed his eyes red. Everything he saw was blood red. His left arm hung limply by his side, and a large part of his chest had caved in. Suddenly Lu Ye's movements froze. The coiling mountain saber stopped above Xue Hao's head. Xue Hao stood a foot in front of him. He stretched out a hand and plunged it into Lu Ye's chest. His large hand grasped Lu Ye's heart, and transcendence energy surged from his palm. It was as if he would crush Lu Ye's heart if he made any sudden movements. "Are you still not going to submit?" Xue Hao's expression was cold. This was a good opportunity. Although the red talisman's might had not been fully activated, he could not care less about it now. Just as Lu Yi was about to activate the red talisman's might, Li Shang's voice suddenly rang out in his mind. "Open your deity ocean." Lu Ye's mind moved, and he hurriedly opened his deity ocean. In the next instant, something strange happened. His vision suddenly became strange, and his entire body relaxed, as if all his injuries had been healed. Then, he directly crashed into Xue Hao in front of him. He had clearly crashed into Xue Hao's body, but he did not feel any impact. When Lu Yi came back to his senses, he was already standing on a vast ocean. After being stunned for a moment, Lu Yi suddenly reacted. "Deity ocean." This was clearly not his deity ocean, because Lu Yi did not see the soul pagoda. Furthermore, the aura here was very unfamiliar to him. The entire ocean was blood red, as if it was a sea of blood. Lu Yi immediately reacted to where he was. This was clearly Xue Hao's deity ocean. Li Shang had brought him along, and started a soul battle, just like what Li Shang had done to Lu Yi on the way back from the Island of Versatility's auction. Invading another's deity ocean, and starting a soul battle, was not a simple matter for the average person. After all, everyone's deity ocean was protected, and without breaking through the protection, it was impossible to invade the deity ocean. Thus, one would need to use some special methods or treasures. However, the soul race was born with such abilities, and their deity ocean was their forte. This kind of battle was a huge advantage for them. As expected, above the blood sea, a figure suddenly appeared. It was Xue Hao's soul avatar. At this moment, he frowned as he looked at Lu Yi, completely unable to understand how Lu Yi had managed to invade his deity ocean. However, when he saw the figure beside Lu Yi, he came to a realization: soul race. He had been wondering how Lu Yi had such ability. Even if he had been careless, he would not have allowed a star constellation to casually invade his deity ocean. So it turned out that he had the help of the soul race. Xue Hao was overjoyed. When luck came, there was no stopping it. The value of a soul race member was not low. If he could subdue Lu Yi, and then subdue the soul race member, he would have made a killing this time. He looked at Lu Yi with a cold smile. Soul battles are indeed the soul race's forte, but this is my deity ocean. Do you think the two of you can make waves here? Although he saw that Lu Yi had the help of a soul race member, Xue Hao was not afraid in the slightest. In fact, it could even be said that he was very happy. This was because suppressing Lu Yi with his physical body alone might not be enough to subdue him. However, if he used some tricks on his deity ocean, the chances of success would be higher. As he spoke, his aura spread out. It was still the aura of the early Yu Yao. The suppression of the divine attribute did not only suppress one's physical strength, but it also suppressed one's deity ocean. This was something that no blood race member could resist. The blood sea started to churn, turning into huge waves. It was as if a dormant vicious beast had awakened, and it wanted to devour the two thieves who had intruded here. Lu Ye's expression became strange. He only calmly looked at the terrifying waves that were sweeping toward him, and he had no intention of dodging at all. The waves swept over and swallowed him whole. Xue Hao frowned, because he suddenly realized that something was not quite right. When the blood sea calmed down and the waves dissipated, Xuehao's eyes suddenly widened. He saw that a dilapidated warship had somehow appeared above the blood sea. Wuxia was standing on the deck of the warship, looking at him with an indifferent expression. The ferocious waves that had swept over just now had no effect on him at all. What was this? Even with Xuehao's knowledge, he could not tell what this strange warship was. It was called a soul artifact. But did such a soul artifact exist in this world? But very soon, his expression turned to one of shock, because as Wuxia's spiritual energy surged, the dilapidated battleship suddenly took on a new look. Following that, numerous blurry figures emerged from the battleship and scattered around. The dilapidated warship suddenly seemed to come alive. It was like an ancient vicious beast that had barged into this world. It was ferocious and terrifying. A huge and fierce sense of danger rose in Xuehao's heart. Before he could do anything, the warship suddenly shook and a huge and fierce beam of light shot toward him. The ferocity of the beam of light caused his heart to palpitate. Fortunately, this was Xuehao's divine sea. He more or less had the geographical advantage, and it was also very convenient for him to move around. Faced with such an attack, he quickly dodged and easily avoided it. But in the next moment, Xuehao felt his soul tremble uneasily. That attack had indeed not hit his soul avatar, but this place was his divine sea. No matter where that attack had hit, it would have been a kind of injury to him. Before Xuehao could stabilize himself, another bright beam of light shot toward him. He dodged again, but just like before, the beam of light slammed into the blood sea, causing the blood sea to churn. It was very uncomfortable for him. When the third beam of light arrived, Xuehao roared, "That's enough!" He raised his hand and the blood sea churned. An object rose from the blood sea. It looked like a mirror, and was clearly a soul artifact. End of chapter. Chapter 15-17. When the beam of light arrived, Xuehao held the mirror in front of him with both hands. The incomparably ferocious light beam bombarded the surface of the mirror, but there was no sound. The smooth surface of the mirror actually swallowed the light beam completely. Wuxia controlled Spectre's ship to attack several beams of light, but they were all devoured by the strange mirror soul artifact. He immediately understood that this mirror was of extremely high quality. Under the suppression of Xuehao's divine attribute, his soul avatar was only at the early stage of Yu Yao's soul avatar. However, this mirror soul artifact had been nourished in his divine sea for countless years. Even with Spectre's ship's might, Wuxia could not do anything to it. He was not in a hurry. After all, in this battle of offense and defense, he held the absolute initiative and advantage. Although the mirror soul artifact was good, it still had a limit. It could not be maintained indefinitely. Xuehao used the mirror soul artifact to temporarily block Spectre's ship's attacks. But he knew that this was not a long-term solution. Thus, he was looking for an opportunity to counterattack. The waves in the divine sea churned. Pillars of water constantly rose from the sea of blood. They were like blood dragons that bared their fangs and brandished their claws as they pounced on Spectre's ship. However, Spectre's ship was both offensive and defensive. Once the ship's protective array was activated, even though there were many blood dragons, they could not break through the array. They could not do anything to Spectre's ship for a while. The situation was in a deadlock. Wuxia could not do anything to Xuehao, and Xuehao could not do anything to Wuxia. Li Shang had been standing quietly beside Wuxia, but at this moment he suddenly said, "I'll help you." As he spoke, his figure flickered. Like a wisp of smoke, he fused into Spectre's ship. In the next moment, Wuxia raised his eyebrows in surprise. He could clearly feel that as Li Shang fused into Spectre's ship, the already powerful might of Spectre's ship became even more ferocious. Li Shang had this ability. He knew that the soul race's soul possession secret technique was not limited to the physical body of living beings. Some soul race members could even attach their souls to the weapons of cultivators, increasing the weapon's lethality. However, Spectre's ship was not a weapon. Strictly speaking, it was a soul artifact. Wuxia did not know that the soul race could attach their souls to soul artifacts. However, when he thought about it, it was not strange. The soul race was named after the soul. Soul artifacts required soul energy to activate. He had originally planned to slowly wear down the power of Xuehao's Mirror Soul artifact, but with Li Shang's assistance, he immediately increased the intensity of his attacks. The beam of light from the ghost ship became brighter and thicker. The blood dragons along the way could not withstand a single blow, and exploded one after another. Beam after beam of light shot into the Mirror Soul artifact, causing Xuehao's expression to change drastically. He could clearly feel that this soul artifact that had accompanied him for so many years was rapidly reaching its limit. However, he could not allow the pillars of light to wreak havoc in his divine sense sea. Instead, he had to take the initiative to absorb every single pillar of light into the mirror. He knew that the consequences would be terrible, but he had no choice but to do so. This was simply being dismembered, causing his heart to be filled with torment. In his anger, he could only strengthen his attack on the specter ship, frantically urging the power of his deity ocean. The sea of blood boiled even more. However, the ghost ship had a defensive array. Although Xuehao's strength was much stronger than Lu Ye's, he still couldn't break through the defensive array and cause any damage to Lu Ye's soul avatar. A moment later, under Xuehao's despairing gaze, cracks began to appear on the Mirror Soul artifact in his hand. A bright light blossomed from those cracks, and an extremely terrifying aura began to fill the air. Xuehao's expression became one of terror, but it quickly turned into determination. He used the mirror that was about to shatter as a shield in front of him, and rapidly charged in the direction of the ghost ship, shouting, "Let's die together!" Lu Yi had already sensed that something was wrong the moment the mirror cracked. This Mirror Soul artifact had devoured too many of the ghost ship's attacks. That devouring didn't seem to be eliminating them, but rather temporarily storing them inside the mirror. Now that the mirror was about to shatter, the many attacks stored inside might erupt all at once. Let alone Xuehao. Even the ghost ship itself might not be able to withstand such a ferocious attack. Now that he saw Xuehao charge over with the mirror, he immediately understood that he had guessed correctly. This vampire Yu Yao actually wanted to drag him down with her. "Li Shang, run!" Lu Yi shouted. Although he wanted to steer the ghost ship away from Xuehao's divine sea, under Xuehao's intentional blockade, the vast divine sea wasn't a place he could leave as he pleased. Now, he could only rely on Li Shang's ability. As soon as Lu Yi finished speaking, Li Shang reappeared. He grabbed Lu Yi's hand and jumped up. With this jump, it was as if he had jumped into the underworld. Out of the corner of his eye, Lu Yi saw a violent explosion of light, as if a great sun had exploded. Xuehao roared in indignation, and then a terrifying power swept out in all directions. Even the ghost ship, which was protected by a protective array, was torn to pieces by this power. Lu Ye's head hurt, and he couldn't help but groan. Then he felt his entire body hurt, especially his chest. By the time he came back to his senses, he had already appeared in the previous battlefield. Xuehao was right in front of him. He still had one of his hands extended out and stuck it into his chest. That large hand was still holding onto his heart, maintaining the posture he had before the soul battle. But at this moment, Xuehao no longer had any signs of life. His wide eyes were empty and lifeless. His soul avatar had already been shattered. Although his physical body was intact, it would be difficult for him to survive. Lu Yi raised the mountain saber in his hand and slashed out diagonally. Saber light flashed. Having lost his vitality, Xuehao's fleshly body was no longer as strong. The arm that had pierced into Lu Ye's chest was cut off. Lu Yi staggered back a few steps and leaned against a soft body. It was Li Shang who supported him. Using the last of his strength, Lu Yi raised his hand and sent out a fierce flame, burning Xuehao's corpse. Only then did he say to Li Shang, "Let's go." He didn't know how many Yu Yao of the blood race had come chasing after him. Although it seemed like there was only Xuehao at the moment, who knew if there might be more behind him? Not only was he heavily injured, but his physical body was also weak. Even the power of his soul had been greatly depleted. If more Yu Yao attacked, he would have to use the red talisman. Li Shang reached out and grabbed the blood crystal left behind by Xuehao. Only then did he bring Lu Yi in the direction of the spore cloud. Along the way, she said, "That Yu Yao of the blood race's cultivation is far superior to yours and mine. Thus, I had to wait until the moment he relaxed his guard before I could activate the soul battle. She was undoubtedly explaining to Lu Yi why she hadn't activated the soul battle at the beginning. She had been waiting for an opportunity all this time. When Xuehao had stabbed his hand into Lu Ye's chest and thought that the battle was over, that would be the moment he relaxed his guard. Lu Yi nodded silently. He raised his hand and wiped the blood from the corner of his mouth. He said softly, "Thank you." This time, it was all thanks to Li Shang. If she hadn't activated the soul battle, he would have had to use the red talisman to have a chance of dealing with that Yu Yao of the blood race. However, that was only a chance. If the red talisman hadn't been able to deal with Xuehao, then he wouldn't have had a good ending. In the soul battle, he had a huge advantage with the Spectre ship. This thing was both offensive and defensive. Even those whose spiritual power was stronger than his wouldn't be able to take advantage of it. This was evident from Xuehao's fate. Xuehao had been suppressed by the holy attribute, but he had still been able to unleash the power of Yu Yao's early stage. In the end, his soul had still been scattered. Ever since he had obtained the Spectre ship, Lu Yi had always treated it as the greatest barrier to protect his spirit sea. This was because he couldn't take the initiative to attack, and could only rely on the Spectre ship to defend himself. However, if he had Li Shang's ability, then in the future, if he encountered someone stronger than him, he would also be able to activate the soul battle and defeat them with his spiritual power. After traveling for a short while, he saw a few tall figures approaching from afar. It was Mu He Black Umbrella and the others. They had left on the spore cloud, but they were still worried about Lu Yi. After some discussion, they decided to return and lend Lu Yi a hand. After all, this was a matter between the wood spirit race and the spore race. They couldn't just stand by and watch. When the two sides met up and saw Lu Ye's condition, Mu He and Black Umbrella were shocked. However, they were even more shocked when they learned that Yu Yao of the blood race had been killed. That was a Yu Yao. Although Mu He and Black Umbrella did not know the exact cultivation level of the other party, she should be at least in the middle stage of the Yu Yao realm. She was actually killed in such a short time. What kind of earth-shattering strength did the two constellations sent by the reincarnation tree have? After returning to the spore cloud, the two constellations continued to move forward. Lu Yi had taken the initiative to land in front of the spore cloud. One reason was to guide the two races, and two was to guard against any dangers ahead, so that he could deal with them in a timely manner. However, this time, Mu He and Black Umbrella placed him in the center of the spore cloud. They let him stay with a group of newly born wood spirits and spore race children. This was undoubtedly the safest place in the spore cloud. Lu Yi didn't refuse. In his current condition, he really couldn't fight anyone. Li Shang stood guard beside him. He sat cross-legged, recovering his physical body while investigating his divine sea. Neither the ghost ship nor the ferocious attacks from the ghost ship appeared out of thin air. They originated from Lu Ye's own spiritual energy. After the previous battle, he had exhausted a great deal of his spiritual energy. The ghost ship's imprint was still there. So even though Xuehao's mirror shattered, and the ghost ship in his divine sea was also destroyed, Lu Yi could condense a new ghost ship at any time, as long as the imprint was there. The destroyed Spectre ship was merely a manifestation of the power of Lu Ye's soul. Physical injuries could be recovered by swallowing spirit pills. Moreover, Lu Yi was now at the late-stage constellation realm, and cultivated the blood race's secret arts. It wasn't difficult for him to recover, but it would take some time. Replenishing spiritual energy wasn't so convenient, and if his spiritual energy wasn't abundant enough, even if his physical body recovered, he would still be in a state of mental exhaustion. He had a few spirit pills on him that could recover spiritual energy. He had bought them from the Myriad Elephant Chamber of Commerce as backup, but the effects weren't too good. End of chapter. Chapter 15:18. Throughout the starry sky, there were many kinds of spirit pills that could restore the physical body, but there were not many that could restore the soul, and they were many times more expensive. The spirit pills Lu Yi bought from the Myriad Elephant Chamber of Commerce were the best, but the effect was not very good. Thinking about it, Yang Kai took out a handful of seaweed from his storage ring and chewed it. Unexpectedly, Li Shang, who had been guarding him, was shocked when he saw the seaweed again. Spirit refining grass? Lu Yi looked at him and asked with some surprise, "You recognize it?" This seaweed was something he brought back from the Constellation Hall. At that time, the entire Constellation Hall was wrapped in this kind of seaweed, making it look like it had grown hair. It took him a few months to clean up the seaweed, so one could imagine how much of it there was. He kept these seaweeds because he felt that they should be good stuff, especially when it came to recovering the power of the divine soul. However, he never figured out what this seaweed was. "Can I see it?" Li Shang asked. "What's there to not see?" Lu Yi grabbed another handful of seaweed and handed it to Li Shang. Li Shang took it and carefully examined it, a strange expression appearing on his face. "It looks like spirit refining grass, but it's a bit different from the spirit refining grass I know. Where did you get this?" "I picked it up," Lu Yi said casually. This could also be considered as picking it up. Li Shang was a little speechless. To pick up spirit refining grass so casually, this luck was really amazing. "Tell me about it," Lu Yi said. He was quite interested in this seaweed because it could restore soul power, which was undoubtedly very valuable, especially since he had a huge amount of it on hand. However, the source of this thing was not easy to explain, and Lu Yi did not lack spirit jades, so he had never exposed it. Otherwise, he would have already exchanged it for spirit jades. The soul refining grass is a specialty of my hometown, but even in my hometown, it is an extremely precious spirit grass. It is of great use to our soul race. Its name refers to its effect. It can be used to refine the soul. Although its effect is not second to none, it is the safest and has the least hidden dangers. This thing looks like the soul refining grass, but it seems to be a little different, Li Shang said with a puzzled expression. Lu Ye's heart moved. Maybe it's because it grew in a different environment, so it looks different. However, this thing is indeed beneficial to the soul. A normal environment might not have much effect on the spirit refining grass, but the special environment under the Wanxiang Sea was hard to say. "That's possible." Li Shang nodded, agreeing with Lu Ye's statement. "But whether it's true or not, I'll have to try to find out." Hearing this, Lu Yi took out a large pile of seaweed and gave it to her. Li Shang's eyes almost popped out of their sockets. So many. Was it a lot? Lu Yi thought to himself that the seaweed he had stored in the Constellation Hall had already piled up into a mountain. What was this little bit to him? "Isn't this a specialty from your hometown? Don't you have many?" Lu Yi asked. Li Shang looked at him with a complicated expression. "Although the spirit refining grass is a specialty of our hometown, each one of them is extremely rare. Don't chew it, it's not edible." Lu Yi stopped chewing. "If it's not edible, how do I use it?" He had always been eating like this. Previously, in order to cultivate the 10,000 waves of the tidal sea, he would eat a bit of seaweed every time. "Wait a moment, let me see if this is the spirit refining grass," Li Shang said as she sat down beside him, and very carefully pulled out a strand of seaweed from the pile Lu Yi gave her, and held it in the palm of her hand. Lu Yi felt her spiritual energy begin to surge, and was surprised to see the seaweed in her palm bloom with a faint light. From the seaweed, an extremely strange power began to surge. The corner of Lu Ye's eyes couldn't help twitching as he silently spat out the spirit refining grass he had been chewing in his mouth. After a while, Li Shang opened her eyes overflowing with joy. "This is the spirit refining grass, but it looks a little different from the spirit refining grass produced in my hometown. Where did you find it?" Li Shang asked, but as soon as she spoke, she realized that it was inappropriate to ask such a question. Lu Yi didn't care and casually said, "I accidentally found it in a certain world domain, but it's gone now. Does this thing need to be refined with spiritual energy?" He had tried to refine it with his spiritual energy before, but it was useless, so he swallowed it. In any case, with the innate skill tree, he didn't have to worry about being poisoned to death. As a result, he found that swallowing it had an effect on restoring spiritual energy, so he kept eating it, but he didn't expect that he was going in the wrong direction. Yes, you need to use spiritual energy to refine it. This is the spirit grass used to temper the soul. It's too wasteful for you to chew and swallow it like that. Lu Yi tried to refine the seaweed according to Li Shang's method. And after a while, he looked happy because he found that the effect of this seaweed was much greater than if he swallowed it directly. Swallowing it directly could only restore a little of his spiritual energy, but by using spiritual energy to refine it, not only could he restore more spiritual energy, but it could also temper his spiritual energy. In a short time, he couldn't see much of the effect, but in the long run, his spiritual energy would become extremely tough and powerful. It turned out that he was wrong. Lu Yi thought of the spirit refining grass he had swallowed before and couldn't help feeling a little distressed. Fortunately, he had a huge amount of spirit refining grass in his hands, so the previous consumption was almost negligible. He just didn't know if this thing could be used in alchemy. If it could, then the effect it could play would be even greater. While Lu Yi was deep in thought, Li Shang pushed the pile of spirit refining grass in front of her back. Lu Yi looked up at her. Li Shang said, "Spirit refining grass is extremely precious. Now that your spiritual energy has been damaged, you can use it to recover." Lu Yi smiled and pushed the spirit refining grass back. "Take it, consider it a thank you gift from me. I still have some of this, it's enough." Li Shang pursed her red lips and hesitated. If it were anything else, she naturally wouldn't care. There were too many treasures in the starry sky that were useless to the soul race. But spirit refining grass was different. This was exactly what the soul race needed. With this pile of spirit refining grass, she even saw hope of advancing to Yu Yao. Even she couldn't remain indifferent. However, she still felt that it was necessary to remind Lu Yi. "Do you know how much a stalk of spirit refining grass is worth?" "How much?" Lu Yi asked. "At least 5,000 spirit jades." Lu Yi was stunned. He knew that spirit refining grass was definitely valuable, but he didn't expect it to be so valuable. If one stalk was worth 5,000, then how much was the spirit refining grass in the Constellation Hall worth? Not to mention the spirit refining grass in the Constellation Hall. Just the ones he gave to Li Shang were worth at least 1,000,000 spirit jades. While Lu Yi was calculating his wealth, Li Shang thought he finally realized the value of the spirit refining grass, and was reluctant to give it away, so she pushed the pile of spirit refining grass back to him. Lu Yi finally regained his senses. "I told you to take it, so take it. If we meet any enemies later, I'll need your help." Li Shang looked into his eyes and didn't see any reluctance. For a moment, she couldn't figure out what kind of person Lu Yi was, giving away something worth 1,000,000 spirit jades, just like that. Moreover, spirit refining grass wasn't something that could be bought with spirit jades. In the end, she accepted it and softly said, "Thank you." Lu Yi continued to refine the spirit refining grass to recover his spiritual energy. The more he refined, the more Lu Yi could feel the miraculous effects of this grass. It really could temper his soul. Li Shang didn't refine the spirit refining grass and continued to stand guard by his side. Black Umbrella and Mu-He came to visit Lu Yi from time to see how his injuries were recovering. The wood spirits and spore race children seemed to have learned about Lu Yi and Li Shang's kindness from their elders. And from time to time, some children would run over to give them a few small mushrooms. These mushrooms were of various colors, and all of them had extraordinary healing properties. Moreover, they were sweet and delicious. Lu Yi's injuries improved day by day, and his soul energy also became abundant. No more blood tribe masters came after him, so it seemed that Xue Hao was acting alone. Thinking about it, why would a late-stage moon jade need the help of others? Xue Hao must have thought that he could easily take down Lu Yi with his own strength, but he didn't expect to fail miserably, shattering his soul and extinguishing his vitality. The rest of the journey was relatively peaceful. 3 months later, a strange scene appeared in the starry sky. It was a giant tree that was emitting fluorescent light. It stood in the starry sky out of thin air. The tree was huge and boundless. Its canopy was dense, and its roots extended in all directions. It was like a giant dragon entrenched in the starry sky. Stars hung from the tree like fruits, emitting a resplendent light. Whether it was the spore races with spirits, Lu Yi, or Li Shang, They all stared blankly at this astonishing scene. Although Lu Yi had entered and exited the reincarnation tree twice, he had always directly entered the tree's interior. He had never seen what the tree looked like from the outside. Until now, such a large tree gave a strong visual impact. Lu Yi had never thought that there would be a tree in this world that could grow to such a size. It could be said that the area covered by this tree was the size of an entire galaxy. The spore cloud slowly approached the area covered by the tree, and the closer it got, the more insignificant it felt. Following the guidance of the reincarnation tree's imprint on the back of his hand, Lu Yi led the spore cloud to a branch of the reincarnation tree. The branch swayed gently, and then a black door opened in front of it. Within the spore cloud, the spore race and Wood Spirit Tribe's constellation masters were bidding farewell to their people. Most of the people of the two races could migrate into the reincarnation tree's tree world and live under its protection, but the reincarnation tree didn't accept cultivators of the constellation realm and above. This was because constellation realm cultivators already had the ability to survive in the starry sky, so the constellation masters of the two races couldn't enter the tree world. Farewells were painful, and parting was also unbearable. After a long while, the constellation masters of the two races maintained, and the people of the two races passed through the door in an orderly manner and entered the tree world prepared for them in advance. End of chapter. Chapter 15:19. In front of the reincarnation tree's huge branches, the spore cloud had already disappeared. Only about 100 huge figures stood there. They were the lunar mansions of the Wood Spirits and the spore race. With Mu He and Black Umbrella in the lead, the two lunar mansions bowed respectfully to Lu Yi and Li Shang. Mu He said, "Thank you, my friends, for your help in escorting us along the way, allowing us Wood Spirits and the spore race to migrate safely. We will remember your kindness." Lu Yi returned the bow. "Patriarch, you don't have to worry about it. I was just following Elder Shu's orders." He paused for a moment, then asked curiously, "Where will you go from here?" The Wood Spirits and the spore race who were below the lunar mansion's realm had been brought into the reincarnation tree world, but the lunar mansions of the Wood Spirits and the spore race had nowhere to go. Lu Yi did not know what they were planning to do. Mu He said, "We will look for a place where we can survive. When the time comes, we will bring our people over." In the universe, there were actually many realms that could be inhabited, but most of them did not give birth to powerful beings. If it was a normal race, it would not be difficult to find a suitable realm for them to live in. But the Wood Spirits and the spore race were special. A realm that was suitable for them to live in was not enough to satisfy their needs, so they had to be well hidden. Otherwise, they would be targeted by powerful beings. Of course, if they were lucky enough to find a place where the Wood Spirits or the spore race lived, they would be able to blend in smoothly. Lu Yi could do nothing about it. He could only wish them good luck. The lunar mansions of the two races left under Mu He and Black Umbrella's lead. Lu Yi turned around and walked into a door behind him with Li Shang. In the same unknown space, Lu Yi and Li Shang appeared at the same time. They saw the reincarnation tree waiting for them. On the tree, the reincarnation tree smiled kindly. "You two have done well this time. Thank you for your hard work." Lu Yi said indifferently, "Elder Shu, you talk to them about the rules, but they don't talk to you. What do you want to say?" The reason why the reincarnation tree had summoned Lu Yi to solve the problem in the Blue Jade world was because this was a matter of the constellations. Therefore, even if the reincarnation tree heard the pleas of the Wood Spirits and the spore race, it could only look for Lu Yi, the only constellation it had. But in the end, Yu Yao from the Blood Tribe had actually come running over. Moreover, she was a late-stage Yu Yao. If it weren't for Lu Ye's holy aura suppressing her, and Li Shang's help, Lu Yi wouldn't have been able to keep her red talisman. The reincarnation tree was puzzled. What happened? As for how a late-stage constellation realm cultivator like him had managed to kill a late-stage Yu Yao, there was no need for him to go into detail. The reincarnation tree knew that he possessed a powerful saintly nature that could suppress the Blood Tribe. After hearing this, the reincarnation tree looked furious. The blood race's actions have already broken the rules. Don't worry. I will give you an explanation. As he spoke, he suddenly closed his eyes. At the same time, in the various realms occupied by the blood race, the reincarnation tree's clones began to tremble violently. Several years had passed since the last battle of the Divine Sea. These reincarnation tree clones were still sprouting and growing healthily, waiting for the next century to flourish. However, at this moment, all of them suddenly withered and died. The blood breeds in charge of guarding the reincarnation tree avatars in various realms noticed this strange scene and hurriedly reported the news. Very soon, blood breeds Yu Yao and even Rizhao came to investigate in front of the reincarnation tree avatars. The reincarnation tree clones continued to tremble, and an inexplicable power fluctuated wildly. Yu Yao and Rizhao, who had come to investigate, quickly figured out the whole story. Their faces were as dark as water as they cursed Shui Hao for ruining their race's once-in-a-century opportunity. It would have been fine if the reincarnation tree hadn't intervened in the invasion of the Blue Jade world. The blood race could send out any experts they wanted. The Blue Jade world couldn't resist because it couldn't. However, since the reincarnation tree had intervened, they had to abide by its rules. The blood race was the first to break the rules. And now that the reincarnation tree clones had withered and died, this was clearly the reincarnation tree's punishment. Without the reincarnation tree clones, the blood race would no longer be able to participate in the battle of the Alpha Origin Divine Sea in the future, nor would they be able to obtain any benefits. This was undoubtedly a huge loss for the entire blood race. In the unnamed space, the reincarnation tree told Lu Yi about the punishment for the blood race's various realms, but Lu Yi didn't feel much. He also knew that the reincarnation tree couldn't really do anything to the blood race. It wouldn't go as far as to find Rizhao of the blood race to make an example out of him. This punishment didn't seem painful, but in the long run, it would undoubtedly have a significant impact on the future development of the entire blood race. Those who could stand out in the battle of the Alpha Origin Divine Sea would all have great achievements in the future, and the blood race always occupied a lot of spots. Now that the blood race couldn't participate, it gave the other races an opportunity to reduce the number of experts born in the blood race in the future. Little friend, this matter has been completed. Is there anything you need this old man to do? The reincarnation tree had previously said that if he could complete this mission, he would be able to fulfill one of Lu Ye's requests, which could also be considered a reward. Lu Ye didn't have any other requests. He just wanted to know how to return to the Jade Conch Galaxy from the Wanxiang Galaxy. Others might not know, but for the reincarnation tree, which had clones all over the starry sky, this was definitely not a problem. However, he didn't directly ask how to return to the Jade Conch Galaxy from the Wanxiang Galaxy. Instead, he asked, "Old Shu, if I set off from here and return to my homeland, how long would it take with my current strength?" The reincarnation tree pondered for a moment and said, "With your strength, it would take at least 100 years to set off from here, even with the help of the star boat." 100 years. Although it wasn't as terrifying as he had imagined, it was still a very long time. Lu Yi had only cultivated for a dozen or so years. Then what if I set off from the Wanxiang Galaxy? The reincarnation tree pondered again. 3 to 5 years is enough. Lu Yi was overjoyed and hurriedly said, "Then please give me a star chart that can guide me back to my homeland from the Wanxiang Galaxy." "As you wish." The reincarnation tree seemed to have been prepared. As it spoke, its trunk shook, and a ball of light fell from the dense leaves and floated into Lu Ye's hand. The ball of light dissipated, and Lu Ye finally saw what was inside. It was a leaf. It looked inconspicuous, but if he immersed his divine sense in it, he would be able to see a complete star chart. Lu Ye examined it for a moment, and found that it was indeed the route from the Wanxiang Galaxy to the 9 states. He hurriedly put it away and bowed. "Thank you, old Shu." He could finally go home, although there was a clone of the reincarnation tree in the 9 states, and he could ask the reincarnation tree to send him back. Returning to the 9 states was not his ultimate goal. He wanted to bring the constellations of the 9 states out, establish a foothold in the Wanxiang Sea, and cultivate to become stronger. Therefore, no matter what, he had to have a route between the 9 states and the Wanxiang galaxy. Otherwise, it would be meaningless if he returned to the 9 states, but not to the Wanxiang Sea. The reincarnation tree said amiably, "You deserve it. Little friend, are you going back to the Wanxiang Sea now? I can send you there." Lu Yi hurriedly said, "Then I will have to trouble you, old shoe." The reincarnation tree smiled, and its branches drooped down and intertwined to form a door. Lu Yi led Li Shang into the door, and the reincarnation tree's voice suddenly rang out. "Little friend, before you advance to Yu Yao, you should try the Yin Yang Great Millstone." After stepping out of the door, Lu Yi found that he had returned to his cave on the Peerless Island. He was curious. He could go directly to the reincarnation tree from here, because of the reincarnation tree's mark. He didn't know how the reincarnation tree had sent him back the way he came. However, he couldn't understand the mysterious abilities of a supreme treasure like the reincarnation tree. Although this trip had taken him half a year, he had finally resolved one of his worries. As a reward for completing the reincarnation tree's mission, he had received a star map to return to the 9 states. Moreover, his relationship with Li Shang had also improved greatly. However, before he left, the reincarnation tree had said something that Lu Yi was very concerned about. It had asked him to try the Yin Yang Great Millstone before he advanced to Yu Yao. The Yin Yang Great Millstone was a starry sky wonder. When Lu Yi had read about it in the dwarf tribe's Rest Abyss Pavilion, the first thing that was recorded was the Yin Yang Great Millstone. Thus, even though Lu Yi had never been there, he had a deep impression of this starry sky wonder. According to the dwarf tribe's records, the Yin Yang Great Millstone was almost a land of death. Any living being that had entered it had all died, including Sunshine. However, an expert like the reincarnation tree obviously wouldn't do something without reason. Lu Yi didn't understand why it wanted him to try the Yin Yang Great Millstone. Since he couldn't figure it out, Lu Yi didn't think too much about it. He was now focused on the star map. He hurriedly took it out and examined it carefully. After looking at it for a while, he confirmed the route. According to the star map given by the reincarnation tree, he only needed to pass through 2 galaxies to return to the 9 states from the Vientiane galaxy. This was indeed a little shocking. However, this was the star map given by the reincarnation tree, so it couldn't be wrong. When the time came, he would only need to go there personally to find out. However, before that, there were still many things that needed to be prepared. There were still some things that needed to be arranged. After pondering for a while, Lu Yi got up and walked out. He had to share this good news with Tang Jun. The 9 states' strength was still a little too weak. A group of newly ascended constellations was really too weak. Thus, if they wanted to enter the Vientiane Sea in the future, they had to unite the strength of the entire Jade Conch galaxy. Only then would they have the qualifications to establish themselves on the Vientiane Sea. This was also what many galaxies that weren't strong enough did. The right thing to do was to unite the people of the entire galaxy. The Qingli Dao world that Tang Jun came from was one of them. The leader of the Jade Conch galaxy, was also one of them. In addition to the 9 states and the 3 realms joining forces, in the entire Vientiane Sea, although their strength wasn't too strong, it wouldn't be too weak either. After leaving his cave, Lu Yi flew into the air. As he looked around, he saw that the Wushuang Island was becoming more and more prosperous. The crisscrossing streets below were filled with cultivators coming and going. It already had the appearance of a large spiritual island. End of chapter. Chapter 1520. The starry sky energy on Matchless Island was very abundant. Lu Yi silently calculated, and found that if it continued to develop like this, Matchless Island would probably become a high-class spirit island in just a few months. From a deserted island that no one cared about, to a superior spiritual island, how long had it been? The minor constellation palace was far more effective than he had expected. Moreover, this was because he had controlled the power of the minor constellation palace, and had not allowed it to unleash its full power. The power that the minor constellation palace could unleash now was probably not even 10% of its original power. If he had allowed it to unleash its full power, Matchless Island would have become a high-class spirit island long ago. Only the first half of Matchless Island was lively. The second half was still very quiet. That was where the cultivators of Matchless Island lived. The largest sleeping chamber, there was Tang Jun's residence. Lu Yi drifted over. Before he entered, he heard Tang Jun's hearty laughter. The old man seemed to be entertaining guests. Lu Yi could feel that Tang Jun's presence was not the only one in the main hall. There were also two unfamiliar Yuyaos. It was not good to disturb them, so Lu Yi could only leave for now. He came to the first half of Matchless Island and wandered around the streets. Soon, he sensed a familiar presence from a shop. He walked in slowly and saw several cultivators lingering in the shop, inspecting the goods here. The shop staff was greeting guests. The shopkeeper was sitting behind the counter. When he saw Lu Yi, he quickly stood up and greeted him warmly. "Brotherly, what brings you here? Come in, come in." As he spoke, he pulled Lu Yi into the inner room for a chat. The shopkeeper was none other than Enjia. Clearly, he had already bought a shop here. Lu Yi said, "I'm just looking around. Brethren, you don't have to be so polite." Enjia did not force him, and personally accompanied him. "These are some of the specialties of this realm. Brotherly, if you like anything, just take it." Without his relationship with Lu Yi, it would have been impossible for him to obtain a store on the popular and prosperous Matchless Island. But it was precisely because of Lu Ye's words that he was able to obtain this store for his domain with extremely favorable conditions. With this matter alone, he had made a great contribution to the domain he came from. During this period of time, he could call for wind and rain in his domain, and his days were very free and unfettered. Lu Yi strolled around casually. In truth, he was just looking around for novelty because there were many things he had never seen before. Enjia personally accompanied him and chatted casually with him. Soon Lu Yi walked out of the shop. Enjia said, "Brotherly, let's skip the pleasantries. If you need dragon breath crystals in the future, I'll give you the cheapest price." Lu Yi nodded. "Thank you very much. Brethren, I'll leave you to it. I'll visit you again when I'm free." After bidding farewell to Enjia, Lu Yi continued to stroll around. Thanks to Chu Shun's various plans, although the Peerless Island was now very popular, everything seemed to be in order. Moreover, no one caused trouble here. After all, the interests of the Peerless Island involved too many forces, and there was no lack of top forces among them. Therefore, even if the Peerless Island itself was not very strong, no one dared to cause trouble here. Cultivators who could cultivate to the constellation realm were all smooth and slick people. Lu Yi wanted to see if the woman who refined pills had come here to open a shop, but after looking around, he could not find her, so he gave up. He had casually mentioned it that day. If she was not willing to come, then there was nothing he could do. Lu Yi checked and found that it was a message from Tang Jun. There was only one word, "Come." He had obviously sensed that Lu Yi had gone over, but at that time, he was entertaining guests and did not dare to neglect them. Lu Yi headed straight for Tang Jun's sleeping quarters. Not long after, he saw the old fellow in the guest hall. A beautiful maid came to serve tea, and Lu Yi clicked his tongue in amazement. The old man looked a little high-spirited now, and, "Why do you look so much younger?" Lu Yi frowned, wondering if his eyes were playing tricks on him. Tang Jun smiled proudly. "A few days ago, I spent a lot of money to buy a longevity fruit. It increased my lifespan by a lot. Looks like it has some effect." Lu Yi knew that the old man did not have much lifespan left, but he had not expected him to buy a spirit fruit that could increase his lifespan. His luck was really extraordinary. "Aren't you not afraid of death?" Lu Yi joked. In the past, Tang Jun had indeed given him the impression that he was not afraid of death, because the old man also knew that he did not have much longer to live. Tang Jun smiled and said, "I was not afraid of death before because there was nothing to look forward to. Now that there is something to look forward to, I naturally want to live a little longer." The old man could be said to be flushed with success recently. Thinking back to when he first came to the 10,000 Elephant Sea, he was a Yu Yao. but no force was willing to accept him. He was like a homeless stray, pitiful and pitiful. However, things were different now. As the only Yuyao cultivator on Peerless Island, and a middle Yuyao cultivator at that, Island Master Chu Shen undoubtedly valued him very much. Not only did he give him a very generous salary, but he also had a certain right to speak and make suggestions on the management of Peerless Island. It was because of this that many Yuyao cultivators came to visit him personally and befriend him. If it were not for this relationship, he would not have been able to buy a treasure like the longevity fruit that could increase his lifespan so easily. Along with the rise of Peerless Island, Tang Jun also had his own ambitions. He felt that he could still strive for a higher level. Even if he did not reach the sunshine level, he should at least reach the late Yuyao stage, right? By the way, Brat Chu disappeared for half a year. What did he do this time? Tang Jun looked at Lu Yi with some dissatisfaction. Lu Yi had disappeared for half a year before, and that was when he went to the secret place with Bansi. This time, he disappeared for another half a year. He was simply elusive. Lu Ye's expression was solemn. Old Tang, I know how to return to Jade Conch. Tang Jun curled his lips. Where did you get this information from? Don't be fooled. After such an experience, Tang Jun did not have much hope in the information Lu Yi obtained. Recently, he had also been quietly looking for information, but unfortunately, he did not find anything. He could not find any useful information on his side, so he did not believe that Lu Yi could make any progress. I can't say in detail where the information came from, but there is absolutely no problem this time. Tang Jun's expression slowly became serious, and he turned to look at Lu Yi. He knew who Lu Yi was, and for Lu Yi to use the word absolutely, it meant that the information this time was quite reliable. How long will it take? Tang Jun asked in a deep voice. Lu Yi knew he was asking about the distance, so he replied, within 3 to 5 years. What do you plan to do? Lu Yi said, of course we will unite the Qingli Dao world and Jade Conch world, and then bring people back to the Wanxiang Sea. Jade Conch is too remote, and it is not a good thing to stay in that place. Only by letting them come to the Wanxiang Sea and see the myriad sights can our two worlds develop well in the future. Tang Jun nodded slightly. There is no problem with the Qingli Dao world. You can go and tell Wu Zhua, and he will cooperate with you. As for Jade Conch, last time, Tang Jun gave Lu Yi a jade slip and asked him to bring it to Wu Zhua. Unfortunately, Lu Yi was tricked by Zhu Yuan and took him to see the former Nine States cultivator Ma Bin, and did not return to Nine States at all. You can think of a way to deal with Jade Conch. The people there are not easy to deal with. Tang Jun shook his head slowly. He did not have much contact with the people of Jade Conch world, but he could feel that they were arrogant. Lu Yi, who was in the constellation realm, would not go well in Jade Conch. Lu Yi smiled and said, I will bring them along to make a fortune. If they are still not willing, then there is nothing to say. Let them fend for themselves. When are you leaving? In a few days I still have some things to arrange. Let me know when you are leaving. I will send you on your way. Lu Yi nodded. When the time comes, I will indeed need your help. Originally, Lu Yi was worried that the old man's help would not be useful. Seeing the situation today, the old man was considered a figure in the Wanxiang Sea. It was better to let him help than to let Lu Yi do it himself. Returning to his cave, Lu Yi reminded Li Shang to stay here, and he left Wushuang Island. Leaving the Wanxiang Sea, he came to the hidden place of the Desolate Star as usual. He blew the Qinghai Conch to open the door, transformed into Fu Wuzuan and stepped in. Just as he steadied himself, a figure pounced on him and started punching and kicking him. Lu Yi raised his hand to block, and caught the attacking figure in a few moves. Looking at Spectre, who had her back facing him with her but sticking out, Lu Yi said angrily, What are you doing? Are you rebelling? Spectre tilted her head and said angrily, Let go. Her hands were hurting from Lu Yi's grip, and it was really uncomfortable to be in such a shameful position. Lu Yi pushed hard, and Spectre took a few steps forward before she could steady herself. She said angrily, Where the hell have you been? Why didn't you come to pick me up after so long? Didn't you want to come here yourself? It was Spectre who had been clamoring all day to come here to cultivate with Bai Lu. But now she was blaming him. It was really unreasonable. But you can't just leave me here. Spectre was furious. As she spoke, she glared at Lu Yi fiercely and walked towards the door. She was obviously going to leave. She had entered and exited this place several times. And she knew that she did not need to wait for Lu Yi. As long as the door was still there, she could leave on her own. Before she disappeared, she said to Lu Yi fiercely, "When I ascend, the first person Yu Yao will deal with will be you." Only then did Lu Yi understand why she was in such a hurry to leave. She was obviously preparing to ascend. Spectre appeared in the hidden desolate star and hurriedly fled, afraid that Fa Wuzuan would chase after her and beat her up. She secretly planned to capture Fa Wuzuan and give him a good beating after she ascended to Yu Yao. She would avenge the humiliation she had suffered repeatedly. In the merfolk's territory, Lu Yi had no intention of leaving at all. When the door disappeared, Bai Lu, who had heard the commotion, hurried over. Bai Lu was obviously very happy to see Lu Yi. End of chapter. Chapter 1521. After chatting with Bai Lu for a while, Lu Yi told her the purpose of his visit. Bai Lu quickly brought him to see Great Elder Yin Miao. Lu Yi had come to the merfolk's territory for no other reason than to borrow money. He didn't have many spirit jades left. Now that he was preparing to return to the 9 provinces, he naturally had to buy some things. Not to mention other things, he definitely had to buy a batch of starboats. Otherwise, with so many constellations in the 9 provinces, it would be more time-consuming and unsafe to fly all the way here. Moreover, the starboats he wanted to buy were not small starboats, but large ones that could accommodate many people. These things were generally more expensive. Hearing this, Yin Miao smiled and said, "How much do you want?" Lu Yi said, "How much can you give me?" Yin Miao pondered for a moment and said, "Is 50 million enough?" Although the mermaid clan occupied a huge spiritual jade vein as their habitat, it was not to say that they could casually mine it. This was because this was their habitat, so there was a plan to mine the spiritual jade. Under the premise of ensuring that the scale of the vein would not be reduced, the amount of spiritual jade that could be mined every year was limited. Moreover, the merfolk clan also needed spirit jades to cultivate, so they had to keep some for backup. The merfolk clan could only take out 50 million. That's enough. Lu Yi quickly nodded. He just wanted to buy some starboats, so it shouldn't cost too much. Then please wait for a moment. I'll ask my clansmen to pack them up and send them to you. Yin Miao left, and didn't let Lu Yi wait for too long. In just 2 hours, a merfolk sent 50 million spirit jades to him. Lu Yi wanted to write an IOU, but Bai Lu stopped him. She asked him to send more spirit pills, or other materials that the merfolk needed in the future. Lu Yi said, "I'm afraid I won't be able to come back for the next 10 years. Bai Lu's expression changed slightly. "What's wrong? I have to go back to my homeland. It's a long journey, so it will take some time." Bai Lu finally understood. Although she was reluctant, she couldn't stop him. She could only ask Lu Yi to report his safety as soon as he came back in the future. Lu Yi readily agreed. As usual, he borrowed a seahorse from the merfolk clan and rode it to the Constellation Palace. Half a day later, he arrived at the Constellation Palace. He pushed the door open and walked in. The seahorse star beast had followed Lu Yi back several times and was already familiar with the route. Seeing Lu Yi enter the Constellation Hall, it returned to the mermaid territory. Lu Yi had left some storage rings in the Constellation Palace, which contained a large amount of spirit-refining grass and the corpses of star beasts in the 10,000 Elephant Sea. Lu Yi thought for a while and decided to take some as backup. He left the rest here, and then returned to the unparalleled island through the door of the minor Constellation Palace. After swimming for a distance, he quietly left the sea and returned to Wushuang Island. Just as he entered the spiritual island, Chu Shen welcomed him. "Senior brother, you're back?" He had heard that Lu Yi had returned, but he hadn't been able to find Lu Ye's whereabouts. He didn't know when Lu Yi had gone out. "Yes, what's the matter?" Lu Yi asked. Chu Shen said mysteriously, "Senior martial brother, follow me first." Saying so, He led Lu Yi to his sleeping quarters, then presented a storage ring to Lu Yi, as if he was presenting a treasure, and said happily, "Senior brother, please take a look." Lu Yi was puzzled. He picked up the storage ring and checked it with his consciousness. There was nothing inside, only about 10 million spiritual jades. "This is..." Lu Yi looked at him. Chushan said, "These are the spiritual jades from the sale of the formation plates, senior martial brother, and our Wushuang Island's share of the profits." "So much?" Lu Yi was surprised. Lu Yi wasn't sure how many spiritual jades were sold from the formation plates, but he was sure that it wasn't that much. It could be said that more than half of it came from the Wushuang Island's share of the profits. Chushan was full of smiles. "Big brother, you don't know, but our Wushuang Island is now famous. It's a famous brand on the 10,000 Elephant Sea. Just by renting the shops, we earn a lot every year. We even participate in the management of some of the shops, so we get a share of the profits. It's not an exaggeration to say that we earn a lot of money every day. This is just the beginning. We'll earn more in the future." Lu Yi was full of praise. "Well done." After being praised, Chushan smiled even more happily. "It's all thanks to Senior Martial Brother's nurturing. Without you, Wushuang Island wouldn't be what it is today." Lu Yi shook his head. Although he did help a little when the Wushuang Island was first established, the development of the Wushuang Island today was inseparable from Chushan's initial planning and various efforts during this period. Chushan contributed a lot to the prosperity of the Wushuang Island today. Now that Chushan was mentioned, everyone knew that he was the island master of the Wushuang Island. Everyone had to give him face. No one would say that he was the son of a Sunshine Sect master, or the son of Jiu Yen. This was the result that Chushan wanted. A constellation mansion, leading a group of constellations, to be able to build such a huge foundation in a complicated environment, like the 10,000 Elephant Sea, was simply a legend. "Oh right, I'll be leaving soon. I'll only be back in 10 years. Lu Yi said. Chushan was shocked. "Where are you going, senior martial brother?" "Back to my homeland." Chushan understood. Since Lu Yi was going back to his homeland, it was only natural. However, he didn't know where Lu Yi's homeland was. A return trip would take 10 years. "Senior martial brother, do you want to bring a few people with you? They can help you along the way," Chushan said. But after thinking about it, he felt that it was inappropriate. The pharaoh was already a peak constellation mansion expert. Who on the Wushuang Island could help him? There was only Tang Jun. But Tang Jun was the only Yu Yao on the Wushuang Island. If he left, who would oversee the Wushuang Island? No need. Lu Yi shook his head. "I'll go and come back quickly. It'll be more comfortable." "Then senior martial brother, be careful." "I'll wait for senior martial brother's return," Chushan said seriously. Lu Yi nodded. Then he thought of another matter. "Is there a shop on our island that sells star boats?" Chushan said, "There is." "Does senior martial brother want to buy a star boat?" "I want to buy a batch." "How's the quality and price of the star boats in that shop compared to the ones in the Myriad Elephant Chamber of Commerce?" Chushan smiled and said, "Many of the Myriad Elephant Chamber of Commerce's star boats are provided by them. Therefore their quality is guaranteed. Moreover, the price is slightly cheaper than the ones in the Myriad Elephant Chamber of Commerce. Of course, if senior martial brother wants to buy one, I'll ask them to give you the best price." Half a day later, under Chushan's persuasion, a late-stage constellation mansion cultivator brought an exquisite album to Lu Yi. He politely handed the album to Lu Yi. The album seemed to be forged from a unique metal. There were pictures of all kinds of star boats on the album. When Lu Yi channeled his spiritual energy into the album, the pictures seemed to come alive. They turned into illusory figures and floated in front of Lu Yi, allowing him to inspect the star boat more thoroughly. Lu Yi kept inspecting the album. He found that the star boats were indeed very good. There were all kinds of star boats. Not only was there a complete variety, but they were also of high quality. Lu Yi soon took a fancy to a star boat called the Silverfish. Su Yuqing had given him a star boat with the same name. Moreover, the appearance of the star boat was similar to the one in the album. It looked like a silver fish. However, the The planetary ship Su Yuqing gave him was only a small one, and it could carry 9 people at most. However, the silver fish that Lu Yi had his eyes on was a large spirit boat. It would not be a problem for it to carry more than 100 people. The price was not cheap at all. Even though Chu Shen had given him the best price, it still cost 800,000 spirit jades. Lu Yi planned to buy 30 of them. Firstly, there were too many constellations in the 9 prefectures. If he didn't have enough planetary boats, he wouldn't have enough of them. Secondly, he wanted to leave some of them in the 9 prefectures, so that when the 9 prefectures wanted to come to the Wanxiang Sea in the future, they could use them. Although Lu Yi had already taken a fancy to the silverfish planetary ship, he still flipped to the back to see if there was anything more suitable. However, Lu Yi didn't take a fancy to a star boat. Instead, he took a fancy to a warship called the Tiger Shark. After pondering for a moment, he realized that it would be safer to have a large number of star boats sailing in the Starry River if they were protected by starships. The Tiger Shark warship was shaped like a shark in the sea, looking very ferocious. It was not a large warship but a small one. It could be piloted by 3 to 5 people. After all, even with Lu Ye's current wealth, he could not afford a large warship. The price of a warship was undoubtedly more expensive. Even though the Tiger Shark warship was only a small warship, it was still worth 500,000 spirit jades each. After a brief calculation, Lu Yi finally placed an order with the Star Cultivator. He ordered 30 silverfish planetary ships and 10 Tiger Shark warships. The 60 million spirit jades that he had just received were instantly reduced by more than half. Obviously, the Star Cultivator did not expect such a big deal. After receiving the deposit, he beamed with joy and promised that he would prepare the goods and deliver them to him within 10 days. After the Star Cultivator left, Lu Yi sent a message to Tang Jun. Then, he ran to Anja's shop and bought some dragon breath crystals as backup. He also bought many miscellaneous gifts, preparing to give them to his friends. After all the shopping, Lu Yi was only left with 10 million spirit jades. He could no longer use them. Whether it was the starboats or the warships, they would all need some spirit jades to sail in the future. He returned to his own cave and waited patiently. During this time, Lu Yi tried to send a message to Pu Ke. After all, Pu Ke was one of the few friends he had in the 10,000 Elephant Sea. Since he was going to leave, he should at least give him a heads up. However, he found that he could not contact Pu Ke. Suddenly, he remembered that Pu Ke had run away a long time ago. He seemed to be avoiding his betrothal. He wondered if Pu Ke had advanced to Yu Yao's realm. Logically speaking, he should have entered the Constellation Hall a long time ago. In less than 10 days, the star boats and warships that Lu Yi had ordered were ready. Lu Yi personally inspected the star boats and warships and made sure that they were in good condition. There were no signs of damage or traces of them being used before he handed over the remaining spirit jades. Now that everything was ready, he could set off for the land of the 9 provinces. Inside the cave, Lu Yi stood up and looked at Li Shang beside him. Li Shang understood what he meant and pounced on Lu Yi. She activated the soul possession secret technique and attached herself to Lu Ye's body. Her identity was special, and it was not convenient for her to be exposed. Even if the soul race had a special ability that allowed them to conceal themselves, she could not guarantee that she would be able to escape Yu Yao's detection. End of chapter. Chapter 1522. Lu Yi flashed out of the cave. Tang Jun was waiting outside with a solemn expression. When he saw Lu Yi, he called out, "Let's go." Lu Yi summoned a planetary boat and stepped on it. Tang Jun steered the boat and soon flew out of the 10,000 Elephant Sea. After flying for half a month, the galaxy suddenly became lively. A large number of cultivators gathered in the same direction, which was exactly where Tang Jun and Lu Yi were heading. "What's going on?" Lu Yi looked around curiously. Tang Jun shook his head. "I'm not sure, but it can't be anything bad." Cultivators were a group of people who wouldn't wake up early if there was no benefit. Something that could attract so many cultivators must be something good. The further they went, the more lively it became. So many cultivators appeared out of nowhere. A few days later, an entrance to the insect passage appeared in front of them. Looking from afar, they saw a long line in front of the insect passage. Many cultivators rushed out of the insect passage and entered the 10,000 elephant galaxy. Lu Yi frowned. Old Tang, is that the insect passage to the Long Cloud Galaxy? According to the star chart given to him by the reincarnation tree, he had to pass through 2 galaxies if he wanted to return to the 9 states from the 10,000 elephant galaxy. The first one he had to pass through was the Long Cloud Galaxy. The Long Cloud Galaxy was connected to the 10,000 elephant galaxy by the insect passage, so it was very convenient. However, the insect passage of each galaxy was guarded by the local powerhouses. Without some connections, it was impossible to pass through freely. Lu Yi could only ask Tang Jun to find a way. Fortunately, the Long Cloud Galaxy had a partnership with the Peerless Island. There were 2 shops in the Long Cloud Galaxy on the island. Tang Jun had some connections with Yu Yao of the Long Cloud Galaxy. With his help, it wouldn't be a problem for Lu Yi to enter the Long Cloud Galaxy. However, it seemed that Lu Yi wasn't the only one who wanted to enter the Long Cloud Galaxy. There were many people, but Yu Yao, who guarded the entrance to the insect passage, didn't seem to have any intention of stopping them. This was a little strange. When they got closer, they found that the cultivators who wanted to enter the Long Cloud Galaxy had to pay a certain amount of spirit jades. Moreover, the price was quite high. Each person had to pay 5,000 spirit jades. For ordinary constellations, 5,000 spirit jades was a considerable amount of wealth. Lu Yi had spent a lot of effort to catch a white spirit, but it only cost him 3,000 to 4,000 spirit jades. Tang Jun put away the star boat and led Lu Yi straight to Yu Yao, who was standing at the side of the path. Brother Tang. Seeing Tang Jun, Yu Yao hurriedly cupped her fists. Tang Jun returned the greeting and walked to Yu Yao's side. He asked curiously, Brother Zhang, what's going on? Why are there so many people wanting to enter your Long Cloud Galaxy? Yu Yao chuckled and said, Brother Tang, you might not know this, but the Wheel of Fortune suddenly appeared in our Long Cloud Galaxy. Once the news spread, it became like this. Tang Jun was stunned when he heard this. The fortune wheel? He couldn't help but sigh. Your galaxy is truly a blessed place. Such a divine object has actually descended. You should all be rich. Yu Yao Zhang laughed heartily. It was just luck. We didn't expect something like this to happen either. Our fellow cultivators were too enthusiastic, so we couldn't stop them. We could only charge them some passage fees and let them seek their own fortune. As he spoke, he looked at Lu Yi, who was standing next to Tang Jun, and asked, Is this Brother Tang's junior? Tang Jun nodded. A good-for-nothing nephew. He wants to travel around to gain experience, but for some reason, he wants to go to your Long Cloud Galaxy. But don't worry, Brother Zhang. Although this kid's strength isn't much, he's not a troublemaker. He won't make things difficult for your galaxy. Lu Yi calmly stepped forward and bowed. Greetings, Senior Zhang. Yu Yao Zhang smiled slightly and said, Since he's Brother Tang's subordinate, the passage fee will be waived. You can enter Long Cloud Galaxy with this token. If anyone investigates your background, just show it to them. Saying so, he handed Lu Yi a token. Lu Yi thanked him and took it. Yu Yao Zhang then said, It's a rare opportunity. Why don't you try your luck at the Wheel of Fortune, little friend? Who knows, you might encounter something good. Tang Jun cupped his fists and said, Then this old man will send him over first. I won't disturb you anymore. Go ahead, Brother Tang. Yu Yao Zhang gestured. The two walked to the side, and Tang Jun transmitted his voice. You're quite lucky, kid. You actually came across the Wheel of Fortune. If I had known, I wouldn't have wasted this favor. He paused for a moment. Do you know what the Wheel of Fortune is? I've heard of it. Lu Yi nodded. He had seen records of it in the dwarf tribe's rest pool pavilion. Because it was very interesting, it had left a deep impression on him. Strictly speaking, the Wheel of Fortune was a Starry Sky Supreme treasure. But unlike most Starry Sky Supreme treasures, this thing was not fixed in one place. Instead, it would disappear and reappear from time to time. Its position and time of appearance were completely irregular. Because there were many insect passages in the Thousand Phenomenon Sea that connected to the major galaxies, cultivators in the Thousand Phenomenon Sea would often receive news of the Wheel of Fortune's appearance and rush over. As for the galaxies where the Wheel of Fortune had appeared, they would do the same thing as the Long Cloud Galaxy. They wouldn't stop cultivators from entering, as doing so would incur the wrath of the masses. Instead, they would charge a certain amount of spirit jades as passage fees. This way, they could earn quite a bit of spirit jades. Basically, each appearance of the Wheel of Fortune could earn a galaxy at least a few 100 million spirit jades. Such a huge amount was not a small amount anywhere. This was also the reason why the Wheel of Fortune had the word fortune in it. Whenever it appeared, it would bring fortune to the star system where it appeared. However, if cultivators were to participate, not only would they receive good fortune, they might also receive bad fortune. This was a matter of pure luck. No one could predict what would happen. I won't say much about what you already know. You can participate in this matter. It won't take too much time anyway, Tang Jun said. Understood. Lu Yi nodded. Then I'll be going. Take care of yourself. Go. Tang Jun waved his hand. He also wanted to try the Wheel of Fortune and see if he could benefit from it. However, the people in the Long Cloud Galaxy obviously wouldn't let a random Yu Yao enter their galaxy. Otherwise, once the entrance was opened, many Yu Yao would definitely come over. At that time, the Long Cloud Galaxy would be unable to suppress them. Thus, they could only let the star mansions enter. Lu Yi turned around and walked toward the insect passage. He did not need to line up to enter. The insect passage was very large, and there were people entering and exiting. He only needed to enter from a place where there was no one. Without any sound, the scenery around him became strange and dazzling. When Lu Yi regained his footing, he had already arrived at the Long Cloud Galaxy. The Yu Yao of the Long Cloud Galaxy was also there. Thus, although there were many cultivators here, no one dared to cause trouble here. There was no need to ask where the Wheel of Fortune was. He only needed to follow the flow of people. Lu Yi summoned his stellar boat and flew forward with the flow of people. Li Shang released his soul from his body and silently stood beside him. Although there were many cultivators nearby, they were all at the Star Mansion's realm, so they did not have to worry about being discovered. Everyone was excitedly rushing in the same direction. The journey was peaceful. 5 days later, a huge copper plate suddenly appeared in front of them. It towered in the starry sky. The copper plate was grand and ancient. It looked tattered, as if it had been through a lot of battles. It was hard to imagine what kind of cruel battles this starry sky supreme treasure had gone through to become like this. There had been Sunshine Realm cultivators who had tried to subdue it, but no one had ever succeeded. After all, no matter how tattered it looked, a starry sky supreme treasure was still a starry sky supreme treasure. It was not something that could be easily subdued. There were many cultivators gathered around the copper plate. Most of them were Star Mansion's realm cultivators. There were also several Yu Yao cultivators scattered in different directions. They should be the Yu Yao of the Long Cloud Galaxy. Cultivators kept disappearing into the copper plate from all directions. There were also cultivators who appeared from the copper plate. Some of them looked happy. Clearly, they had gained something from the copper plate. There were also some who shook their heads and sighed. They probably did not gain anything. Fortunately, when Lu Yi arrived, he happened to see a cultivator appear from the copper plate. His entire body was pitch black, and he looked terrified. He did not know what had happened to him inside. Immediately after, there was the sound of a thunderclap. A bolt of purple lightning appeared above the cultivator's head and struck him straight down. That cultivator had the cultivation of a late-stage constellation realm cultivator. When he saw this, he shouted loudly and activated a protective spiritual treasure above his head. However, the purple lightning only struck once, and that protective spiritual treasure was shattered into pieces. There was another thunderclap. Another purple lightning bolt struck. The cultivator's expression changed drastically. He hurriedly rushed in the direction of a nearby Yu Yao. He shouted, "Senior, save me." That Yu Yao only looked on coldly unmoved. When the purple lightning bolt struck, the cultivator's body swayed. He looked even more wretched. He spat out a mouthful of blood, and his aura became extremely weak. Although he did not die, his injuries were very serious. No one knew how long it would take for him to recover. The cultivator did not linger. He forced himself to stay alert, and flew into the distance. Soon he disappeared. The many cultivators nearby felt their hearts tremble as they watched. Entering the Wheel of Fortune wasn't a competition of strength. It was all about luck. If one was lucky, they might be able to obtain some benefits. If one was unlucky, they might even lose their lives. As for what kind of benefits there were inside the Wheel of Fortune, no one knew. Those who had gained something would hide it, and not let others see it. However, it was said that some people had obtained a transcendent treasure that was very suitable for them. Luyi did not expect to gain much. It would be great if he could get a piece of Phoenix Sky's blue crystal. Last time, Half-Ci had invited him to accompany her to the secret place. They had agreed that he would use the Phoenix Sky's blue crystal as a reward. In the end, there was an accident. Luyi had not seen Half-Ci since then. After observing from the side for a while, Luyi discovered that many people were unlucky. Some were struck by lightning, some were burned by fire, and some were covered in a layer of black smoke after coming out. They looked extremely unlucky. No one knew what they had encountered. End of chapter. You're tuning in to the Li Mei's Wuxia Whispers YouTube channel. We're so grateful for your support, and don't forget to subscribe to join us on this incredible journey through captivating stories. Your generosity through donations truly makes a world of difference, as it's the primary source of revenue that allows me to expand and enhance this channel for you. Thank you from the bottom of my heart for being a part of this adventure.